right, so let's get started with our session on the challenge of compliance and compliance by design. And first of all, it's my pleasure to thank our panelists for coming here today. And the way we're going to do it is I'm going to make a few statements. I had some slides prepared, there you go. I'll make a few introductory statements with those, and then we will hear from Catherine Simonnin, who is with Orange Business, Design, Architecture, and Innovation Governance, and Pierre, the Chief Innovation Officer of Gaia-X. They will give a joint presentation of about 25 minutes on the state of affairs of the Gaia-X trust framework and the problem of automating compliance in that context. So that will really be a chance to hear something about where is the Gaia-X trust framework in this context right now. And then we will hear from Sven Löffler, who is the head of data spaces and data products at T-Systems, his perspective on the role of clearinghouses, and finally, Antoine Kubiak, who is with government affairs, managing government affairs at Microsoft, will give us the perspective from Microsoft's end on compliance. And once we're done with that, we have about half an hour for open discussion. Again, there is a document to be found at the end of the web page called Automated Compliance, which gives some more background than we can cover here at this point. Okay. So let me just give you a few thoughts from my end on the challenge of compliance and compliance by design. So compliance is really what connects regulation with implementation, right? Implementations have to be compliant with regulation, and that raises a number of challenges. First, there's the need to clarify what actually the legal and regulatory framework implies in terms of technical implementation concerns, but also in the other direction, there's the question of if I make certain technical choices, what legal effects do they actually have? And so those are sort of the fundamental questions. At the same time, there's also an economic aspect to this topic, which is one of the reasons why we have it here today. Namely, we need some technical support for implementing compliance in order to make regulation economically viable. It cannot be too expensive to become or be compliant for the thing to economically fly. In that context, in the context of clarification of implications in particular, I'm really pleased to be able to announce the latest version here of the Gaia-X compliance document, which is, I think, has been published like the day before yesterday. And Catherine will surely be saying something more about that, and that's a really great step forward towards meeting some of those challenges I mentioned. Automated compliance by design is a concept I like, and by that, the background for that notion is sort of this, that automation, of course, would be a great thing to have. If we could just automate the process of figuring out how to be compliant and automate the process of checking if some system is compliant, that would be wonderful. However, for a number of reasons, that's fundamentally not possible. First of all, the legal system itself is not automatable. It involves human beings, even by law. I mean, for example, you can't eliminate judges from the legal system. From the technical perspective, due to fundamental results of computer science, we know that you can't just take an arbitrary system and answer arbitrary questions about the properties of that system. For example, could this system ever get into some sort of error situation? Could it be vulnerable to some sort of cyber attack, or indeed could it become, in some technical sense, in violation of some compliance rule? We know that such properties cannot be fully automated, but then again, that's no reason not to try to automate as much as possible. Okay, so that raises the question, what is possible? That's an interesting set of questions around that. Automated compliance by design means, in my parlance at least, it sort of means compliance by design plus design for automation. And what I mean by that is that one principal way of dealing with the incompleteness of automation, that is that we cannot automate 100%. How do you react to that situation? Well, one of the main tools for reacting to that is to try to design your system in such a way that you know a priori that the system is compliant by design. Again, this is not something you can feasibly do for 100% of coverage, but you can do it for a lot of those things, for example, that you cannot automate. So you can build it into the system, and you know in advance that the way you built the system means that it will have certain compliance properties. You can also design for automation. What does that mean? It means that you use certain coding technologies, coding standards, you use design principles for the construction of systems in such a way that it becomes easier to automate certain checks on the system. There's a number of important design technologies available. You can use things like trusted components, for example, in terms of smart contracts. It's important in this context, covered in Article 30 of the Data Act for smart contracts for data sharing. You could think of having trusted contract components lying around in libraries. You could have test frameworks that have, special properties relevant for compliance checking. You have programming and verification technology and testing technology available that you can bring in. And then you have frameworks. Frameworks is also a design tool, right? And this is, in the context of the Gaia-X trust framework, highly relevant here. In fact, I would say that the frameworks around data spaces and data ecosystems are really some of the chief enablers of automated compliance by design in this context. So there's a lot of things you can share once you have a framework and an ecosystem. I mentioned some of these topics here. In particular, also governance structures are relevant, and I know Catherine will also be saying something about that. So you can talk about shared technologies for automated compliance by design in the context of data ecosystems like Gaia-X. Now, my last statement here is a little plaidoyer for maybe rethinking from a researcher's perspective and a research manager's perspective like myself, how we should be organizing research around the topics we're talking about here. So why is this of interest here? Well, if the European Union is sort of pioneering regulation for data sharing and also looking ahead towards the AI Act, AI, and it really is a pioneering regulatory effort in this field, then it's fair to say, I think, also when you take into consideration the economic factors that I just mentioned, that EU should also then be pioneering research and development programs for technological leadership in this area. We heard earlier from some of our panelists today that I think Hubert was the one who mentioned earlier this morning that the situation raises opportunities for EU to play a leadership role. But then the second point here should be taken into consideration. Now, how do we do that? Here I see from my perspective one problem area that I would like to just give my thoughts on very, very briefly. I think in this space we need a better alignment between academic and industrial research. And I think in this context we can take some inspiration from the way things are done in the United States. Looking towards the United States in this context is particularly relevant because the US has really been the driver of the basic technologies that we're using. And so in the US, you have sort of a closer connection between industry, politics, and computer science in particular. I was very impressed, for example, to see a recently published report by the White House. Now you have to understand this is a report by the White House. It's called Back to the Building Blocks, A Path Towards Secure and Measurable Software from February 2024. It was surely motivated by a stream of cyber attacks, some of them extremely grave, happening earlier this year. And in this report, you see topics like memory-safe programming languages, secure hardware, but also things like formal methods, which sort of belong to a kind of a basic research strand of computer science, which has really had most of its impact in the United States because they're producing these systems. Although a lot of the research, also a lot of the high-quality research, is done by European researchers. When I go to conferences like computer-aided verifications, who do I find? I find lots of wonderful colleagues from India and other places in Europe. And then I find people from Amazon Web Services. Those are the only company representatives there. Okay, so I think we need to sort of do something about that if we want to take this leadership plaidoyer seriously. And so my proposal is to think back to something that was actually formulated by an American management professor, Stokes, who back in the 90s formulated a model for thinking about basic versus applied research in a book called Pasteur's Quadrant. He used the work of Louis Pasteur as an example of something which was not just basic research, not just applied research, but what he called use-inspired basic research. And I think this is a category that has no home in the current system of research funding. In Germany, for example, we have DFG, Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, it funds basic research. Then we have BFBF and other programs funds sort of applied industry-related research, and that's all great and fine. I'm not arguing against that. I am arguing, though, that if we want to make real progress in terms of gaining also sort of technological leadership in a space like this, which requires a lot of basic research-style thinking, but of course it will be without effect if it's not use case inspired. So we should have use case-oriented basic research programs, and we don't have those today. Thank you very much. So with that, I will hand the control to Catherine and Pierre.
Sorry. I will not repeat it. So for people online, good afternoon. We are going to have a 25-minute presentation, and we will take Q&A at the end, so don't hesitate to write down your question during the presentation, and we'll be very happy to answer them later. My name is Pierre Gronlier. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer from Gaia-X, and with me is
Catherine Simonnin, in charge of Innovation and Design Architecture Governance in Orange.
So for the introduction, we are directly going to continue on the presentation that was done by Jakob on the automated compliance. With the first, an introduction of a few of the key definitions that we think are relevant. And the first one is on the...
So as Luc has done this morning, you started by the definition of orchestrator, which is very useful because we didn't have the same definition at all. So what is a trust anchor? Pierre, can you explain us?
Yes. So a trust anchor, you can keep that one open, it works well. Thanks. A trust anchor, that would be the authority that signs claims. Let me elaborate on that. When you have on that picture, you have different types of participants. You have a building that represents a legal entity. You have a warehouse, could represent power stations, machines for services, IoT on the field, we saw that with the farmers. It could be a satellite. You have a human, because we will talk also about EIDAS V1 for natural person. EIDAS V2 comes with a legal person, and then another building. Each of those organizations, personas, will define their own rules for their own ecosystem. By ecosystem, I mean either a corporation or a vertical domain. Per ecosystem, they will define policy rules, schema, trust anchors, compliance rules, so the rules, their governance. And they will store that in a component that we will call the registry. The term registry is directly coming from the IPSI, the European Information Service Infrastructure. They also the notion of registry, and that's the same definition here. The challenge that we have, it's once we have defined the trust anchor, so the type of entity that are eligible to sign claims, how do we make that interoperable? So.
No, this is your questions. How does automated compliance enable building interoperable oh la la, ecosystem, data ecosystem or data spaces?
That's a very good question. Each of those organizations, each of those personas, they will have wallets or agents. Sometimes we call that agents. Those wallets, technically speaking, when we talk about interoperability, first of all, we might need to split that into different layers. We have 4 levels, at least, of interoperability: legal, organizational, semantic, and technical. And here, maybe I will challenge some of the ideas, but when we talk about those ecosystems or those data spaces are as much as about technology than the colors of the wall in the house. You paint your house, you can change the technology. For the one and the bit techie in the room, you can change from YAML to JSON to XML to whatever you want later. However, you can repaint your house, basically. However, once you have designed your governance, your model, who you trust, why you trust them, so design the piece of the room in your house, it's much more complex and expensive to change that later. So a data space, that's mostly about agreeing on a common organization model so that the participants agree on the same common rules. The interoperability for the wallet, that will come with OpenID Connect for VC. We use the same credentials that are being used by the IPSI, by the Fireware Foundation, Fireware Organization, by the DOME project, by Simple. A lot of different ecosystems out there are already converging towards some standards, and that's the same one that we've defined and used in Gaia-X. That's the technical layer for interoperability. Then we go higher into the levels, the interoperability for the trust anchor and the schemas. Here, that's where we see those pink and yellow registry, where we basically, like in mathematics, when you have 2 numbers and you look for the greatest common denominator, that's exactly that. So those registry, the pink registry here, that's the representation of the largest common denominator across those different ecosystems, because those ecosystems agree on the same rules. What is the definition of a consent? What is the definition of a revocation? What is the definition of a legal entity? Is the legal entity registered in China will have the same representation in Europe or in Africa? Is the way I express my revocation for the consent the same in the US or in South America? So those type of rules, how you technically implement that, a credential, a blockchain, a letter that you sign, it's not a detail, but that comes a bit later. So automated compliance enable to build those greatest common denominator in a much easier and faster, cost-efficient way to allow those ecosystems, for example, here on the picture A, B, and C, to start negotiate those governance rules, so that later the participants within those ecosystems can also negotiate cross-ecosystem. So you have different layers of negotiation. So the next question I have now for Catherine is, great, we saw that there are different layers of negotiation. How does Gaia-X provide tools or automate the Gaia-X compliance to enable that?
Okay, so thanks. First of all, we discussed a lot, and the Gaia-X compliance document was mentioned a lot of time this morning, and even by Jakob 2 minutes ago. So this document is really key. You cannot automate something that you did not describe perfectly. So here, this is the document that we agree in the Gaia-X community on, and that will be automated. So this is a paper document, written words, that detailed all the rules, principles, and criterions that we have decided together. So there's much more in this document, but I focus on what is used to automate compliance. So for each criterions, you know what is needed to reach the conformity standard level or the level 1, 2, and 3. You know also, it's also detailed if you need a self-declaration, very important. You declare yourself as conform, compliant to that, or if you need a certification. Of course, if you have the lower level, you will have more self-assessment. If you have upper layer, level 3, you will have more certification. It's not only you saying that you are compliant, it's another entity, a conformity assessment body, one of the trust anchors, very important, that will attest that you have reached this compliance level. So here, criteria per criteria, you know if it's needed, for which level it's needed, and you know if it's declaration or certification. This is the paper document. Based on that, a Gaia-X team, so really the opposite, the Gaia-X CTO team, if I remember well, if I did not mistake, build a software which is called a digital clearinghouse that will enable to verify, check from what he received from the participant that I will detail just after, if it's fulfilling or not the criteria. They also provide other tools to help, like a notary service and a registry, but not the tool needed. And I will not go too much in detail, otherwise I will lose you.
But we can take questions.
But we can take questions for sure.
So, as a service provider, how can I get a Gaia-X label?
Il n'y a pas la...
Non.
Il n'y a pas l'animation?
Il n'y a pas.
I did a nice animation. Okay, so you will not have the nice animation. I will try to animate by myself. So you are a participant, so top left, and you want to become a Gaia-X label participant, in fact. So first of all, you have some criteria that you just need to declare yourself. So it's easy. You fulfill the Gaia-X ontology, not so easy, and you send it to the proper format at a verifiable credential format to the Gaia-X clearinghouse of your choice. Easy. But you want to achieve another level that needs more certification because you have a very nice solution and you want to take benefit of it. So you can have also in your wallet some certificate. So you need, for attestation, for a certification, you need a conformity assessment body that attest that you have reached the permissible standard covering some criteria. Because I forgot to say it, but in the compliance document, criteria per criteria, we have listed all the permissible standards that can be used to fulfill the criteria. So if you have, for example, ISO or CISP attestation, you will cover a lot of criteria with one attestation. One day, the conformity assessment body will be able to deliver directly a signed digital attestation. So it's a VC with a dotted line on the schema. Normally, the second step of the animation. So when you will have it, it will be very easy, directly sent to the clearinghouse, and you will have the certificate. But now, today, we don't have it yet. So you have a certificate in PDF or in paper sign from the conformity assessment body saying that you have reached the ISO, CISP, Secnum Cloud, BSI, some others. I think we have 9 permissible standards listed in the conformity compliance document. Sorry. So if you have a notary service, based on that paper, you will be able, this notary service, to deliver a verifiable credential containing this attestation that fulfill all the criteria covered by the permissible standard. And with that, normally we should have a nice animation showing that you have the signed attestation delivered as a verifiable credential that you can keep in your wallet. just a small remark, the clearinghouse will be presented more in detail by Sven, because the system was one of the first clearinghouse. So.
An important remark in that the diagram also is that we have on one side really the rules and the technical stack that enables the automated check of those rules. The technical stack can be used to automate other rules. That's basically, if we have on that picture, that is two different deliverables, the compliance document with the rules and the compliance engine. For full adoptions, Catherine, what will be the tools that are needed to fully enable the adoption of that system?
So today what is missing is interoperable wallets. We have some wallets, but each of them are really use cases oriented, or I should say provider oriented. And we have a Google wallet, an iPhone, an Apple, wallet, and so on. The idea is here is to have an enterprise wallet, and with the format that is acceptable and that helps to reach the interoperability, so that you don't have to have one wallet per ecosystem or per need, but one wallet fulfilling the access of several potentially data spaces or data ecosystem. The second tool, which is really key also to automate, is the notary service that translates from a format, a PDF format, to a verifiable credential. Is this kind of tool already existing? Pierre, do you have an example?
Thank you very much. We do have an example. You can say on the previous slide. We do have an example. So basically, the role of the notary services is exactly what Catherine described, a PDF, a JPEG file, and turn that into a machine-readable format. A PDF, it's for a human, but that usually represents unstructured information. So if you want to translate unstructured information to structured information and sign information, that's the role, the functional role of the notary. And there are tools being developed outside on the market that typically take a picture using either optical recognition, character recognition, or a visual language model to extract information about those PDFs. The type of information that will be extracted will be typically the accreditation body, the accreditation entity, the issuance entity, the type of issuance type, the insurance attestation number, the scope, the validation date, expiration date, and usually the anniversary or the intermediate audit where those qualifications have been to be reassessed. All those information are not invented by Gaia-X. They are coming from an ISO standards about conformity assessment. What Gaia-X has done is to combine the world of conformity assessment with a technical stack to automate it. And that's the role of typically the notary services. I think that we are a bit early on the time, which is a good thing. We'll have more time for questions.
Sure, thank you very much indeed. I think what we should do is hold questions for afterwards so that we don't get derailed into discussions before we have our next two statements, and then we'll have a bit more time for discussion. So thanks again. And Sven Löffler will now give us sort of the telecom perspective on the role of clearinghouse. Sven.
Yeah, thank you for the great introduction. I think now everything is clear and we have experts on the table here, right? That's nice. What I would like to do in the next 10 minutes, give you a quicker perspective. I'm here at the head of data space and data products at Deutsche Telekom, but I have, of course, different roles in the different steering groups in Eclipse, as in IDSA, a steering member in the Manufacturing Exit Council, of course, and of course, in one of the main leading lighthouse projects, Catena-X, I'm there as well acting as a business owner, and here we took the opportunity and took exactly these components, what you both described perfectly and delivered out of this specific product. But I would like to explain you in this session why it is so important and what was he asked from a customer perspective and what is the actually status quo of it. What was the challenge, right? In a global supply chain, operators are willing to identify business partners. So the business partner, Elektro-Kramer, is sitting in Germany, but is Elektro-Kramer or Elektro-Löffler also able to do business in China? Question mark. Can I trust this party? Can I trust this participant in a data space? So that means it was during the onboarding of any new business partner, it's really important to identify if this business partner is a trustful partner. When I onboarded this partner, I'm doing exactly these steps, what you just described, and I'm issuing at the end a stamp on it and say, yes, this is your digital passport for your data space journey. You can use it in our specific ecosystem. That means I have a trusted onboarded partner. During data exchange between a provider and a consumer, we are talking about participants of an ecosystem, you would like to validate if this trustful relationship is still established. So that means, in our scenario, we use it at the beginning in the onboarding, and in every exchange of information, of data, in a use case, in a specific scenario, we are validating if this partner is still a valid partner. And that was, and is the main element to build trust in an ecosystem. And when you establish such a trust, then of course you would like to understand how often it was used, was it locked, was the regulations being met, and so on and so forth. So that means you need a transparent view for the operator or for the participant that you exchange this information. So that means it is locked, it is operated, and of course it helps you at the end to have a transparent view of the whole activities in the specific use cases. And this is what we took, and this is what we developed there. This was then enhanced by certain components. Pierre mentioned the idea to really take the verifications and read it and stamp it. So that means we are issuing then at the end an IDAS-conform certificate. This is a kind of specific certificate that is stamped by a specific authority, and this increased it to another trust level. Yeah? So that means during onboarding we validated the companies, then during exchange we identified if we are still partners, and of course with the next level we're saying, okay, this verification is really verified, and this is then your passport to go through the different data exchanges. It ends, and this is perfectly highlighted at the end in this digital identity and this organization verified credential will end then in a wallet. Of course, this wallet at the end is a decentralized solution. So that means I can take my wallet, I can take my credential, go to the border control, show my passport, and then I'm moving into another data space. That is exactly the idea. For that reason, this interoperability in the wallet solution are still missing. That is exactly what we are now working on to really jump onto the next phase. And you mentioned it perfectly at the beginning, Eric. It's all about innovation, iterative cycles, and now we took the code, we implement the product, now we identified interoperability between data ecosystems is not yet established next innovation. So that means it takes a while, but we are, I think, jointly with the Gaia team and with Pierre's team on a good track to really understand the importance of the standardization and interoperability. But the main issue, what I'm seeing, and it's a little bit the direction what Oliver Ganser mentioned a little bit, is the interoperability and the standards globally. So it's good that we have our Gaia-X trust framework well established and maybe in Europe also well implemented. But what is really needed is to exchange data with partners in China, in Korea, in the US. And there the regulations are different. So that means the question is, are they adapting our framework, trust framework, how we are integrating, how we are coming to the common denominator that we really have interoperable data exchanges. And that is my point and the message. The importance of standardization is really, really crucial and really important. In our scenario, of course, we used all the specifications and the releases from the Gaia-X trust framework, what mentioned here on the right-hand side. I think I mentioned this to give you a quick overview. What is also really important from our point of view is that we added a component called trusted data sources. So the question is, look into my electrocramer example, how you are validating companies. How you would validate companies in a region, in the Netherlands, in France, as an example, in the US. So you have normally different European states, of course. You have VET IDs, you have IORI, you have LICODE. What we also did here, we cooperating with an external partner called Open Corporates, who's helping us to get a certain reach in all the different countries. So actually, this service is available to identify partners worldwide with 192 countries where we are observing if a partner is sitting in a country, yes or no. So that means with this service, with the trusted data source idea and service, we are extending and the reach, and of course, the reach in a country dramatically. And what we are looking here really to add over time, trusted data source, so that we really have a full coverage, a worldwide coverage, so that we really can identify every participant as a partner in any country. That's a little bit the idea. So I'm not going into a demo, but what I would show you here quick, it's a little bit animated, it goes quick. Maybe you can get these slides later, but what I would like to outline here, this is a user interface, of course, but in the onboarding process and the automated compliance, everything goes automatically. So that means in 1 or 2 seconds, the request goes to the service, it is in a way automated, and then you're getting a business partner number, and when the business partner is issued, then you're getting the stamp, and then the onboarding process goes smoothly away. This is the way how you could visualize it, that of course these criteria are all completely automated, right? And yeah, we are really proud that Gaia-X is using it. I think I explained already how they're using it. For us, and this is then the next phase I mentioned, is really go the direction of interoperability in different countries to really do it automated as well globally, and of course enhancing it in the direction of trusted data sources and trust anchors in specific regions. For that reason, we are really looking for that other clearing houses are popping up in specific regions, so we are really making it interoperable, because our viewpoint is that at the end, in every region, in every country, you will have such kind of infrastructure, clearinghouse node infrastructure available, and like a network layer, right? We are coming from Deutsche Telekom, so that means our visionary idea is at the end that this data exchange should be as easy as a telephone call today, right? Where we have data roaming, we have all the network components, we have software layers, we have other layers on top. Of course, we have applications, but the whole idea is really take a phone call, find you in a dictionary in Japan, exchange data, and then we are doing business jointly together. And that's a little bit the idea. For that reason, we are hoping this will be go a little bit faster to drive market adoption, right? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sven. And our last intervention before we enter open discussion comes from Antoine Kubiak, giving us the Microsoft perspective on compliance.
So thanks for the opportunity to be here. So I'm Antoine Kubiak. I work at the Microsoft office in Brussels in government affairs. I'm working on data sharing policy, cloud policy, interoperability policy, working a lot with some of my standards colleagues in Microsoft. Let's say I'm less a technical expert than some of the brilliant panelists next to me, but I would say I had the chance to be in Brussels for the negotiation of the Data Governance Act, of the Data Act. I think that resonates very well with today's discussions. Even yesterday there was a panel in Brussels, so I think it's really timely discussions. We are 1 year before Data Act implementation, so again, just welcome this opportunity. I think at the outset, what I wanted to say is that, of course, we are glad to see some of these data sharing opportunities in Europe. I think, as you know, Microsoft is a very, very pro-data sharing company. I think we identify similar challenges, opportunities there in that space, because that's also what we are hearing from our customers. in terms of IP, cybersecurity, privacy. But again, I think what says about technology, and when we talk about challenge of compliance, compliance by design, automated compliance, data governance, I mean, all of this together is just about trust, right? So I think the key thing that stays consistent at the end is really about ensuring trust and control, because that's what customers want at the end. Oh, it's a Microsoft PowerPoint issue maybe, but no. So yeah, again, I think the key question is it's really how to ensure trusted data sharing from a technological and governance point of view. I think I will try to address both, first from a technological point of view, with data spaces as a key enabler of this, of trusted data sharing, and for governance point of view, yeah, and I wanted to address some of the Microsoft commitments in that space in terms of data governance and privacy. So first, let me start by compliance from a technological point of view. That's this one. Again, I think being in Brussels for the past 5 years, I think heard many things around data spaces, data sharing. I think what is true is that you really need to accommodate different scenarios. In this case, I think we had some brilliant examples this morning, also on the sectoral space. Again, I think more choice, the better. There's the need to accommodate these scenarios. And one thing that stays consistent is the 3 words I put on the screen. It's really trust, control, and transparency. And these data spaces, in a way, I think, create some of these frameworks for trusting data sharing, right? It's principles that are based on the technology, so we'll come back to that later, and some of the legal commitments as well. I think the key thing we want to achieve is to really reduce some of the risk around the loss of control of data, and really put the participants at the heart of this control. And I think that's really key to really give this in the hand of a participant and give full control in the hands of the participants. How do you create this trust? Again, I put on the screen several terms of pillars and principles. In this space, I think for us, I would say that summarize in 4. I think it's each participant must remain in control of their identity. Each participant decides who to trust. Each participant decides on what policies their data is shared, and each participant remains in control of the deployment. Again, it's a set of pillars that I think in our understanding will create this trust, and that is also flexible and adaptable to the different scenarios we are hearing from our customers. And diving more into detail, in our experience, I think we were always more in favor of a decentralized approach of data spaces. Again, there's different scenarios, depending that I mentioned, depending of the situation, the sector, of course. But I think in our case, you need to really have a flexible approach, right? So in our case, we want to limit. We think it's good to have, let's say, more close peer-to-peer relationships and limiting the number of intermediaries in the chain of trust. Each participant in this case will negotiate their contract, rule of access, contract usage policy there. And a trust anchor, and I'm glad Pierre and Catherine explained better than me what is a trust anchor there. So it's really key in this relationship to guarantee the authenticity of a participant credential and claims. Again, different type of trust anchor that has been perfectly described to accommodate this scenario. And one last thing, I think, which also important for us is that I think you need to be flexible in the infrastructure. Again, can be from an IoT devices to a more data marketplaces type of scenario. But again, I think in our view, it should not be like limited to one specific type of infrastructure. So in terms of data spaces and ecosystem, again, I think it's, as some of my panelists mentioned, I think standardization plays a key role there. I will not go into all the details there, but of course, as you know, Microsoft is part of several initiatives, and we are an active contributor of all these initiatives. Again, I think it needs to be now aligned with all of this initiative, but I think, again, we are excited about all this initiative in general. I think one thing that we may discuss this in the panel discussion that we really would like to be even more involved in the future, it's into the automate verification of credentials and claims. I think we see that as an important accelerator of data spaces. It's also a new space, but we really want to be even more involved in the future in this initiative. One case study that I'm sure some of you are already familiar with, so I will not go into all the details as well, and it's the Eclipse data spaces component. I think it's a good example of compliance by design in a way, which is today's discussion. I think it's one of the easiest solutions to facilitate data spaces. Microsoft is an active contributor of this. It's an open source project. And again, I think it's a good example of compliance by design because it's really where governance is developed through policies and support compliance, while at the same time granting, in a way, full autonomy to the participants in this project. On the technological side, of course, we have developed the right set of technologies there. Again, I will not go into all the details there, but when you have solutions like Microsoft Entra ID, it's really one in terms of a decentralized system of verification of credential management. We have Microsoft Purview governance as well, Azure Confidential Computing, Azure Data Share. It's all some of the systems that our own customers are using to develop their own solution in that space. And I wanted to switch now to more like the legal and data governance side of things, which is also a bit more my space. And again, I think that was also clear in the current discussion we had at the EU level, both in the Data Governance Act, in the Data Act. It's really what are the commitments companies are putting in place to ensure trust and control, which are key essential for this data sharing objective we want to achieve. Yeah, again, as I said, I think it's not about the technology that I mentioned. It's also the legal commitments you put in place. And I think one of the key legal commitments we put in place recently in Europe that you may have heard about it's the Data Boundary Initiative. We launched this initiative a year ago in January 2023. It's applicable to all Microsoft services, so Microsoft 365, Azure, the Dynamics platforms. And again, here, I think it's built on some of our commitments in white space in terms of data residency, local commitments linked to some of the recent investments we made in Europe and program. It was a phased process, of course, and this initiative is ending end of this year in 2024. Again, I think we were in this initiative. I think what is important to say as well is that it doesn't really change the functionalities nor the price that our customer used in the past. And I think that only needs to be read in parallel with some of our, of course, privacy data commitments were in place. So it's not, of course, the storing of the data as such, but also the safeguards and control we put behind in this space. Another solution I wanted to present is the Microsoft Cloud for Sovereignty, which again, here address more public sector customers. It's available for public sector customers, governments, and it's based on different pillars you can see on the screens, moving from the bottom from data residency, building on some of our, let's say, data residency solution in Europe that I mentioned earlier, sovereign control with additional protection and security protections in terms of encryption, for instance, of sensitive public sector data, some governance and transparency process, as well, and some of the expertise with much more like local partner and providers, which I think fits well with my last slide, which is about, of course, the Bleu project we are running in France, which is one of the sovereign cloud solutions Microsoft has developed with Orange and Capgemini. So it's run by Orange and Capgemini, based on the Azure technology. Bleu is candidate for the SecNum Cloud 3.2 certification in France, and yeah, I think it's also a great example of automated compliance and discussion we talked about. Again, we'll not go through all the details there. Everything is online, of course, but of course, could not be in France without talking about Bleu, so I think that was my last slide. And yeah, welcome any question.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists. We now have a time, actually, we're not under great stress time-wise, so we have time for an open discussion, questions from the panelists. Maybe while you're thinking about what you might want to ask, I can start with a question that maybe attaches more directly to the technical part of the discussion regarding verifiable credentials. I know that it is regarded by many as a key question, what is the impact of the choice of the provider of verifiable credentials? I know, Catherine, that you have said that this is an important thing to be thinking about in this context. So I was wondering if you could expand on that.
Yes, no problem. I think there is a misunderstanding between the provider of the verifiable credential and the provider of the label, perhaps, something like that. Verifiable credential contains the same information. Who is sending it is not important. What is important is what is inside. So as explained by Pierre, the issuer, the date, and so on. So is it a question an online question, or is it?
No, that's the direction, yeah.
Okay. So what is really key? Okay. No problem.
The relevance of the importance of using verifiable credentials. Verifiable credentials is a technical term, and you could see that as a transparent envelope with a stamp on it. So basically, a verifiable credentials allows you to verify the integrity of the data being shared, of the information being shared, and to trace who is the issuer of that information. That's the technical, non-technical translation of a verifiable credentials. So the important point here is to have trust in the issuer of that information and verify that when the information is being shared across maybe thousands of different participants, the integrity of that information has not been compromised. That's the role of the verifiable credential.
The provider of the credential, it means the conformity assessment body or the trust anchor. This is really key. Choosing the good trust anchor, the good conformity assessment body. This entity has a perimeter, so this is really key to choose the good one. So and after, perhaps Sven want to reply regarding the clearinghouse?
Yeah, I think regarding the service provider is when you're stamping this verified credential, you can do this once a year, you can do it twice a year, you can do when I'm as electrokramer not appearing tomorrow on because I have criticality with my business. The question is how quick the service provider is reacting to really revoke and say, no, you're not allowed in this ecosystem. So it comes, the differentiation to operate this comes into what are the SLRs, how are the reaction times, how reliable is, and how much countries you can validate this. So that means the operator is more like in managed service to taking care that this will be handled. But of course, the trust comes with the clarifications and the declarations, and this is in this envelope. Yeah, this is. Hopefully, we have all the same credentials and criteria. Of course, what is also different, level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 0 to have conformity in general. So that means in level 3, you have to not only to stamp it, you have to go to somebody who say, yes, this stamp is the right stamp, yes, this data center, and your people that are working there, yes, you can trust them, they have a certificate, they are knowledgeable, la, la, la. It's again a differentiation in service level, right? And this is how it differentiates.
Thank you.
Can I add a comment on the credential? The verifiable credential so allows you to have this traceability of the issuer, and about the interoperability of the information contained within the credential, within this transparent envelope that we can check. We are using the principles of linked data. Linked data, that's the recipe for the World Wide Web, which was introduced by Tim Berners-Lee a few decades ago. And that enables us to have semantic interoperability. For example, maybe one day, we will have the tractor from Ag Data Hub that will be part of Gaia-X for the automotive industry. I don't know if tractors are part of the automotive industry, maybe one day. But if we want to understand that the engine is the same, or the part, maybe in the factory are the same, then we need to have a worldwide way, scalable the worldwide, to understand each other. And those semantic models are based on linked data. And when we encapsulate those linked data into a container that proves who issued it, when, and with the content integrity, then we really have the solution that is able to scale.
Thank you. So I think we should also encourage our friends on the other side of the board to think about what they might want to need, what they might want to formulate as their needs for automation. I realize that it's a fairly technical part of the discussion, of course. Again, though, I think connecting the topic to the economic aspects, it may have to do with simply being aware of is Gaia-X sort of viable as an instrument technologically? Does it take too long to get in there? Is the cost calculation for onboarding in the Gaia-X system, is it viable? I mean, this is the economic sort of side of the compliance question that also is the major motivation for automation. Automation has two benefits, right? It makes things less expensive, and it may raise the level of trust, in fact, because some of the problems related to compliance are better left to a mechanical device, to a computer, assuming that it's doing the right thing. Okay, so maybe moving on to that larger question from possibly both sides, I would like to ask, what do you see as sort of the main next problems that the Gaia-X trust framework should be looking at solving for moving automation of compliance ahead?
I think that there is a huge, thank you for the question, I think that here we are touching one of the core values that will help with the adoption. I will share one number. The market of regulation, compliance regulation, that's 17 billion per year. And by regulation, I mean we have regulation everywhere. Here, when we enter this building, this is a building that welcome public people. So they have to deal with safety, the fireman, the police, and everything. So they are compliance typically everywhere. No, you don't? Okay, run. The market of compliance overall, that's 17 billion. So I don't think that there is a challenge. I think that there is a huge opportunity for Gaia-X, because the trust framework of Gaia-X is not just about CSPs and data. It can be applied to a lot of different ecosystems. And this is a market that is expected to grow up to 24 billion by 2028. So in terms of conformity, again, we have not created something of our own. We've based on standards of the ISO Casco standards. So the definition that you have between a certification, an accreditation, an attestation, and a declaration are coming from the Casco ISO standard. The difference between a verification, a validation, an audit, a sample, all of those are terms already used by the industry for decades for risk assessment and conformity assessment. And that's exactly what we've reused, combined with the technology that was presented before. I think that we have more opportunities than challenges.
I can reply also. That's why I opened the mic. As a Gaia-X member, I can reply. I'm a sprint lead on a PRC document and compliance document. And for me, the main challenge is to have, in fact, members that are participating and proposing things. We can do everything. We are in like an open source mode. But if there is no member that join and give idea and start work with us, we will not succeed. So thanks for newcomers, Emily, and you are all welcome, of course.
Yeah, so I think we've demonstrated a starting point with the current compliance for cloud services, but Pierre is describing much more wider applicability of the framework. But do we recognize it? Has it been tried to do this in other domains or sectors to implement these verifiable credential mechanisms the way you describe it, Pierre? And then maybe also opening up the questions to others. I mean, have we seen this elsewhere, or other initiatives that have clearly asked for, this is my biggest burden, please solve it for me?
Yes. One of the examples was in the presentation from your presentation, Sven. LEI, the GLAIF Foundation is issuing credentials for the identity of financing institution.
Yeah, so it's in use and they're using it, I would say yes, but the question is how many are using it in production. So when you see and look around how many data spaces you would really have in production where there is a commercial model behind. Last time, as I observed China, we had 57 marketplaces there where they're generating a huge volume of business. This is existing. Here in Europe, I would say it's not so close to 50, to be friendly, but this is the status. For that reason, I see this as the biggest challenge for us to really have a global adaptation and to make it global available. Otherwise, it is on our own cooking area in our own country, and we are not using our own food that we fantastically described. For that reason, the biggest challenge is for me really adaptation, actually.
Yes, but to answer your question, I have been involved in the past in the finance sector. It's clear, and maybe Otto can comment on that, that in the banking sector, most of the people you are visiting in the branch next to you, they are de facto spending their time applying on behalf of the government the regulation for finance. And they are now very keen to see whether some tools could be invented which are consistent with the regulation, which are verifiable, but keeping their people back to their normal job, which is to take care of their customer. Aude, would you like to comment on that?
What I can just say, and I will say that I fully agree that in the banking sector, regulation definitely are more and more important, and we have to comply with. And that's why, indeed, to have, I would say, tool solutions that allow to answer directly to, I would say, what we have to face every day, and for our customer as well, is definitely important.
As nobody said already, I think there's another key point to address in the compliance documents. We have a lot of criterions today. I think for the standard compliance level, sorry, it has changed. So and for the level 1, I think we need to simplify it to that we have some not mandatory criterions, because we want to reach also innovation, and innovation are very often startup, and if we ask them too many things to reply to many processes, documentation, it's easy for a huge company like ours, but for a startup we should have less documentation needed, simplified levels.
I can 100% underline it, because every criteria comes with a business value, and this value has a price, or this criteria has a price. So that means if we come more and more and more, then we have to argue on the other side, what is the value for the operator or for the participant who's using it. And this is what we saw in the past really often, that this is not in sync. So for the reason I'm a little bit with you to say, don't do too much criteria, otherwise it's too complicated.
Yeah, just to get back to the discussion we had this morning about lowering barriers to entry for small players, for individual farmers or shopkeepers or whoever. How do you do you see the issues there, and how can they comply with those rules? Of course, I understand that those technologies are automating, etc. On the one hand, they are lowering the cost, but it's highly technically complex, and how can they comply, in fact, and can they invest in systems that basically are compliant with this type of very sophisticated trust-building mechanism?
So there is two parts in my answer. First one, yesterday during the sprint meeting, I proposed to have as not mandatory sustainability criterion, and the first one, it was an easy one. It's just to declare all the consumption of water, CO2, and everything. So even for a farmer, it should be difficult. Even for a farmer, imagine for a startup. So that's why when I say not mandatory, this kind of criteria are very important, but should not stop all the small actors to enter. And regarding the farmers, Orange, I reply as Orange. Orange is the hoster of Ag Data Hub. So this way, as we have a trust infrastructure, they inherit of all these trust solutions. And we have also sell a solution that the farmer uses on his mobile, so very easy with not changing his life, and doesn't need a data center in his, in his house and a CTO. Does it answer the question?
I think it's also interesting in the comparison with the United States that I was mentioning from a research technology perspective. It's also interesting to make that comparison from the regulatory perspective, and maybe Antoine, you can comment on that, because I think one thing one should be aware of is that, and this may not always be perceived that way here. I mean, certainly under the Biden administration, it's not like the American system doesn't generate regulations. I mean, I'm looking at, for example, here just as one example, the Stanford AI Index. Now, this is AI, but again, this is something we need to come back to in this context also. Now, just taking that example, the 2024 AI Index from Stanford says that the number of AI regulations in the United States sharply increases. In 2023, there were 25 AI-related regulations, up from just one in 2016. Last year alone, the total number of AI-related regulations grew by 56.3%. So it's not like the American system is not active on regulating. It's just they regulate maybe in a different way. Antoine?
Yes, no, fully agree. And I mean, in terms of regulation, when I joined Microsoft Office, it was 5 years ago, it was just the beginning, let's say, of a wave we had in the last 5 years, as you mentioned, the AI Act, DSA, DMA, Data Act, GGA. And again, I mean, in our case, we were advocating in a way 5 years ago for all this regulation. I think now the key challenge will be to really have an alignment, a strong alignment between all these regulations. You mentioned the, let's say, US approach about regulating AI. We saw that in India, we saw that in South Africa, we saw that in the UK. Europe is, of course, ahead of the game on this, but I think it will be a key challenge to align all of this. And I think when we discussed data spaces, if you think about the role AI can play in the future when it comes to also automation and all of these issues, I think it's going to be a key issue. I think we are glad in a way to see that the Commission for next mandate, I think, see that it's now time to make these rules work and implement these rules in a way before also regulating furthermore. But yeah, I think it's going to be a key challenge. I think Ursula von der Leyen in the political guidelines, and I think I heard the same thing yesterday in this event in Brussels. I think talk about moving to a data union, and they plan to have a new initiative in that space on the data spaces, which is great and welcome. But yeah, we saw that emerging for different places in the world, and when we are a global company as Microsoft, I think it's also, yeah, in terms of compliance and challenge will be super important, yeah.
Actually, I might take this opportunity to maybe hear people's opinion on the AI topic, which in some sense is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. When you talk about possibilities for creating value out of data, I mean, there is the idea that maybe one should next year bring in that aspect into this kind of discussion, also still within the data regulatory discussion. There are questions like how do the data acts actually intersect or relate to the AI Act? This is sort of like a legal style, a regulatory question, policy question one could ask. There's also the economic question of trying to understand how this new wave of applications might affect the creation of business models for data sharing, right? So I wanted to maybe at the end here, before we go to the coffee break, maybe just ask your opinion on that.
As far as I know, is the next round table. No, Hubert?
We will definitely touch that point.
It's a question, I'm not sure that is fully relevant. I am working for the data space for construction in Europe, Digitalisation, and my question is the question of automation of the contract. Most of the case in the construction industry, we are not working directly with the hyperscaler. For instance, I'm going to give the example of Microsoft. I am working with Bentley on a collaborative platform called Project-Wise. It's an example. My contract is with Bentley, and all of the information on the collaborative platform are under Project-Wise, but all of the storage is in Azure. And I have no contract with Microsoft with that. So my question is the following one, and I asked a question to the European Commission, I did not receive any answer about that, is we need to have, with Gaia-X, I think that is the option, with the mechanism to automatize the vehicle credential, to be able to have this cascade of responsibility. But, I mean, it's not a simple affair, because we are working with a very small company. We don't know anything about the cloud. Most of the cases, they are ignoring that information are in the cloud. So the problem is the complexity of that is it's not B2B, it's B2B2C. And the data is in C, not in B.
So in the criteria, it's really the subcontractor part is written. It's not only your supplier, it's also all its subcontractors, so it's written, for sure. And as Pierre said, data doesn't flow on Rainbow. So of course, you should always request where are your data stored. If you want to be sure it's not in an outside Europe data center, I should say, or operated by a non-European actor, company, if you are level 3 of Gaia-X, you are sure about it. Does it answer the question?
Yes, I am awaiting this answer. But if it is the case, that means in my contract, I'm speaking with a real use case in this case, that means that it's not so simple.
No,
I want to say that it's a really sophisticated approach.
I'm doing design architecture document. This is the kind of question I am asking to the architect of our cloud solution. Are you sure there is no VPN there to this solution? When you build a cloud, you have 50 suppliers. None of them have access to your data. None of them have access for Orange to our infrastructure. They are not able to connect to anything. We are looking software on their site, but they are not connected directly to us. So no subscriber subcontractor can do this. It's really, when you ask for a certificate, and in the criteria it's written for the service provider and all its subcontractors, it means that the conformity assessment body should check that. It's clearly written.
Sounds like a perfect excuse for having a cup of coffee together between the two of you. Let's move to the coffee break because we need to be extremely sharp in coming back at 4. The next panel will, to a large extent, be with people who are online. So please be back at 4 sharp. Now, before we go, thank you very much again to our speakers.
Okay, so let's start with the final panel of the day. I'm especially pleased to moderate this panel on public policies. As we know, and we have discussed that all the day, the Union and the Member States have already significantly supported data sharing initiatives, both by establishing the legal framework and subsidizing industrial initiative and R&D effort. A recent survey performed by Gaia-X has shown that today those subsidies have been culminating at already 1.7 billion euro, which is not a small figure. Now that the foundation and experimentation are in place, what remains to be done? That is really the topic of our panel this afternoon. A new commission shall be in place by the beginning of November, December 2024, and we thought with the program committee that it will be appropriate to expose in this last panel what is at stake for the next 5 years. So I'm very glad to welcome Ivo Volman. Ivo is director of the Data Directorate at DG Connect, and he will open the panel by presenting what has been achieved, but also what the Commission intends to do next. Then, if he shows up, we will have Boris Otto, Executive Director of the Fraunhofer ISST, and Boris has been my partner since day one in creating Gaia-X, and he will give a summary of a paper we have published together mid-June and showing what we suggest for the next stages. I'm very glad that we have also this afternoon Mario Campolargo. Mario is a former Portuguese Secretary of State for Digitalisation and Administrative Modernization, and he will give us the perspective of data sharing implementation as seen by member states. We do have also from New York, Laura Létourneau. Laura has been instrumental in the implementation of the French health data space, which had been launched in 2022. And I am very happy and glad to say that it already gathered 14 million French citizens. And I believe this is quite an achievement to have gathered so many citizens. Laura is also the author of the Digital and Data Roadmap for Ecological Transition, and she will give us a perspective on how to help the emergence of data sharing infrastructure. And I understand you are publishing a report on that, Laura, these days, today or tomorrow. I do not, you will tell us. And finally, happy to have Yvrande-Billon, who will tell us how Arcep is intending to accompany in France the numerous projects of data spaces in the different industries. So we have had this morning Laure de la Rodière, but Anne will give us, in perspective of public policy, how Arcep can help. Let me now hand over to you, Ivo, with your first presentation for the next 15-10 minutes. Oh, Boris, hi. Happy to have you on board. I do not know where you are, in Germany somewhere?
Yes, I'm actually in Munich.
In Munich, okay. Ivo, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello, good afternoon, everyone, and many thanks for inviting me to this conference. I'm very happy to be able to participate, although I cannot be there physically with you. Now, as Hubert said, we are at a very interesting moment in time. A new European Commission will take office soon, and we are eagerly awaiting the name of our next commissioner. So what I would like to do in the next 15 minutes or so is to look back what we have achieved in the last 5 years, and then see what still needs to be done. What can you expect from us? What are the initial ideas? So the basis is, of course, that data is an essential resource for economic growth and competitiveness, right? The market for data is expected to increase to a value of 840 billion euros by 2030. That would represent roughly 6% of the overall EU GDP. And we all know the power of data as an engine for innovation and job creation, and actually how it can improve productivity in all sectors of the economy. Of course, data is the fuel for artificial intelligence, so no artificial intelligence without data. So let's go back for a moment to the European Strategy for Data that was published at the beginning of this mandate in 2020. It's about combining legislation and deployment to strengthen our data economy, and the two go hand in hand. The one cannot do without the other. Really, you have to work on both aspects to make progress. Now, 4.5 years later, I think we have delivered on what we promised in the data strategy. And let's start for a moment to look back at the legislation. So the first instrument that we proposed during this mandate was the Data Governance Act. It was adopted relatively quickly after only 17 months, and it's fully applicable since September 2023. The Data Governance Act is about increasing trust in voluntary data sharing. How do we do that? By putting in place trustworthy mechanisms to bring the supply and demand of data together. Now, in the first place, there are the neutral data intermediaries, companies and organizations that do not have an interest in selling the data as part of their business models, well, unlike the business models of the platforms, but that can be trusted third parties. So we're really moving away from the business models of the platforms here. And these neutral data intermediaries, of course, can also have an important role as trustworthy organizers of data sharing and pooling within common European data spaces. Then there is data altruism. The Data Governance Act creates the conditions to assure that individuals and companies that want to share their data can be sure that the data will be handled with care by trusted organizations. So this will also allow the creation of data pools that can allow data analytics and machine learning, for example, in the area of health. Then finally, the Data Governance Act establishes this European Data Innovation Board, brings together member states and stakeholders. It's about sharing best practices in the member states, but not only. It's also about making sure that we will have the standards in place that will make the data spaces work between themselves, so that you don't create new data silos with the data spaces, and that actually there are bridges between the data spaces so data can be used in different contexts. Now, let me go to the Data Act. It was a second key piece of legislation that was established further to the data strategy. What it aims to do is to achieve fairness in the allocation of value coming from data access and use. And there the Data Act has achieved a fine balance between making data available, but at the same time protecting the interest of those who invest in data generating technologies. Now, it entered into force on the 11th January this year, and it shall apply from 12 September 2025, so exactly 1 year from today. Now, a key component of the Data Act is that it gives users of connected products greater control over the data they generate. So think about smart dishwashers, solar panels, robots in factories. We see an explosion of products that generate data. And actually, things used to be so simple. You bought a product, and everything that came with the product was yours. But how does that work with products that generate data that are sent back to the manufacturer? Well, that was not clear. It was simply not clear. Often manufacturers assumed that the data were theirs. But that's not completely fair, because I've bought this product. So the Data Act actually finds an interesting way of making sure that both the manufacturers and the owners of the objects can use the data. The data can, for example, be used to develop ancillary or aftermarket products or services. So I, as an owner of the product, can make sure that the data is sent to a third party that then offers me aftermarket services. That offers enormous opportunities in the aftermarkets. Now, another key element of the Data Act is that it allows cloud users in the EU to switch seamlessly between providers. And already we see the effects now. We see that several major players in the cloud market in Europe have abolished switching charges before they were obliged to do so by the Data Act. So even before it's fully into application, there are already very visible effects. Then a last thing on the legislative agenda that I would like to mention, and it may be easily overlooked. It's the implementing regulation on high-value data sets. Now, what is that about? It's about public sector information. It's about information that has been paid for by the public purse already, and therefore it should be available for all to use. What type of data are we thinking about? Well, meteorological data, maps, digital maps, environmental information, business registers, all kinds of information that is produced by the public sector and that has a further use potential. Now, the implementing regulation ensures that some of the most valuable data sets that are produced by the public sector, the maps, meteorological data, statistics, but also other categories, are available for free in machine-readable format and through APIs. Now, the idea is to boost entrepreneurship by making the data available across Europe in the same way. And we already see that this leads to the creation of new companies and startups. And it will be particularly valuable for SMEs, since SMEs sometimes don't have the data, and these are very good data resources. Now, the implementing regulation became applicable on the 9th of June 2024. And by December this year, member states will need to report on the measures they have carried out to implement it. So we can expect a major source, a new source for artificial intelligence innovation, since machine learning models require vast amounts of data for training, and this type of data can be used in this context. Let me then go to the deployment, the common European data spaces. So setting up common European data spaces, key economic areas and areas of public interest. And the idea is to facilitate trusted and secure data pooling and sharing in strategic economic sectors and domains of public interest. Now, data spaces, what are they? They bring together, on the one hand, data infrastructures, and on the other hand, governance frameworks, and all to facilitate data pooling, access, and sharing. Now, there are currently 14 common European data spaces we have recognized where the Commission has been involved. And the Commission has put some initial funding on the table. Hubert mentioned an enormous sum of money that is being used across Europe to make European data spaces a reality. And I'm very happy to hear that these investments are there. Now, we put some money on the table, but data spaces are led by stakeholders, not by us. And each space is adapted to the needs and characteristics of the sector in question. Now, for this reason, while some data spaces are still in their very early stages, others are well into the deployment phase. And of course, we should be careful that we do not create new silos, as I mentioned. So The idea is to make it possible for the different data spaces to be gradually interconnected. It may take several years for the full benefits of the investments in data spaces to be realized. And I heard Hubert say last week, and I will quote you, you cannot plant a tree and expect to harvest in the year afterwards. And he's right. Still, several of the data spaces have already achieved concrete results and demonstrated their potential, even though others are still in their infancy. Take the health data space, the Cancer Images Initiative. It has developed a platform that links 39 datasets of images of 9 cancer types, and it contains over 200,000 image series from about 20 million individuals. So by 2026, the aim is to have more than 60 million images covering 100,000 cases, including at least 50 algorithms, tools, and clinical prediction models. So that is really happening right now. As a key component of the Green Deal data space, a highly accurate digital model of the Earth, Destination Earth, was launched in June 2024. Have a look and play with it. Now, by projecting urban flooding, heat exposure, for example, this will allow related safety and health risks to be calculated, and then timely policy measures can be taken. I should mention the Data Space Support Center. It plays a critical role in gluing together the work of the data spaces and make sure they develop in a coherent way, that they are interoperable and benefit from economies of scale. Now, Boris, you're going to talk about it perhaps also. I would like to thank you for all the excellent work you're doing to make this happen. So, what is next? What is next? Now, as Hubert and Boris wrote in their paper, we have to go beyond legislation and funding. We have the framework in place to achieve it. We now need to make all the measures work together in practice so we can reap the full benefits. So, in my view, the next mandate is not going to be about new legislation on data. It's about ensuring that the application of the legal acts is smooth and coherent. That they work on the ground as intended, that companies can really take the massive opportunities that are created through our legal framework. Now, since September 2023, my team has organized 11 dedicated sectoral workshops on the Data Act. Yesterday, we had a big conference on the Data Act. We've participated in more than 50 bilateral meetings with stakeholders, and we think we have reached more than 1,000 stakeholders in these bilaterals. We have also published several guides which explain the legal provisions in a non-technical way, including an in-depth set of Q&As on the Data Act. That was published last Friday, so please check it out. It really contains the most frequently asked questions that came up in the workshops we had with stakeholders, with a set of replies. It's a living document. We're going to adapt it further, but I think it contains quite interesting information about the implementation of the Data Act. And the Commission is preparing model contract clauses for data sharing as mandated by the Data Act, and that will facilitate the life of, in particular, SMEs. Now, then we are working with the member states, in particular through the European Data Innovation Board. Now, we count on the member states to set up the required structures and processes within the established deadlines, and that's not always the case yet for the Data Governance Act, for example. This is really critical for the success of the legal framework. Now, this is not about ticking a box to comply with a requirement. This is really about strengthening the fundamentals of the data economy in each of our countries. Now, part of making data transactions work in a smooth way in the future is to make big steps forward in the work on automated transactions and automated compliance of data transactions, right? It was extensively discussed in an earlier panel today, and also in last year's conference, it was a central theme. Now, the challenge is always to make the lawyers and the IT specialists work together. That's not easy. And to move towards solutions that are robust and that work in practice. It will really be necessary to integrate work that is not strictly related, such as digital identities of European citizens, but also of European companies in the thinking and in the work. Now, I would like to explore another area where the benefits from the same basic technologies that are involved in automated compliance can be used. It's the use of data for compliance purposes, reporting obligations that go beyond the area of data. All the legislative acquis of the European Commission where there's reporting obligations. How can data technologies help? Well, one of the key priorities for the next Commission is actually to reduce the administrative burden related to reporting. And we really think that data technologies can make a difference. Think about the potential for agriculture if reporting data on, for example, pesticides can be harvested automatically at the moment the pesticides are being spread on the fields instead of having to report. Now, this is an interesting area where data technologies can be used, and we intend to fund the development and the deployment of compliance technologies through the Horizon Europe program and Digital Europe. Just let me zoom out in the last few minutes and spend some time on what you can expect on the next Commission. Now, first of all, I expect that data will still be at the forefront of the policy discussions, also in the next mandate. You've seen probably the letter report that came out in April on the internal market. You have seen the Draghi report that came out last Monday on European competitiveness, and data plays a big role in both of them. And you will also have seen the political guidelines of President von der Leyen, published on the 18th of July, that announces the creation of a European data union. Now, I mentioned already that a lot in the coming years will be about implementation, making sure that the framework works in practice. And the political guidelines, they make an interesting link between data and the development of AI and other frontier technologies. Indeed, European AI will only flourish if we manage to untap the right data resources. Now, to quote a recent article in The Economist, like oil fields, the most accessible data reserves have been depleted. The challenge is now to find new ones or sustainable alternatives. So measures to ensure that we have the necessary data resources at our disposal for AI, that European companies benefit from that, will continue to be an important area of work. And of course, sharing data seamlessly and at scale has to be done in line with our values, respecting high privacy and security standards. Now, getting the data to work for Europe also presupposes that our legal data framework is fully understood by everyone, including the interaction between the different individual instruments. And we get signals from the stakeholders that there's still something to be gained there. So we are going to work on that also. But to make that happen and to make a smooth implementation possible, we need the help of the member states in the way they organize data-related issues at the national level. And we also need further input from all the stakeholders. A final very important topic that's also raised by Hubert and Boris in their paper are data flows. Data flows between the EU and third countries. Now, in the European Data Strategy of 2020, we've been clear. Europe will be open, but it will also be assertive. We work and collaborate with anyone as long as fundamental rights and European rules and values are respected. Now, data flows are indispensable for our companies and for the data economy to flourish, but we also have to take into account that we are in a difficult geopolitical setting. So we do not just want to increase data flows, we want data to flow with trust. And we will keep our markets as open as possible while ensuring that the data of our citizens and businesses is protected and secure. Now, I'm pretty sure that there will be further discussions on how to make that happen in practice, also under the coming Commission. So overall, I think we have a very exciting period ahead of us. When it comes to data policy, data will be a key topic, and you can expect some action from our side. You can bet on that. Now, don't expect a range of new legislative instruments on data. We have to make what exists work in practice. So I would like to thank all of you for all the great work that you've been collectively doing to bring the data economy to the next level. And it's actually by combining the practical level with also academic reflections about structures, about trends, that we can have the best results. And that's what's happening in the conference today. So I count on more of that for the next mandate. As you know, we are very happy to engage and to discuss your suggestions and ideas for the future. So thanks again. You know where to find us. And I took 5 minutes too long. Sorry for that, Hubert.
Ivo, thank you very much. I hope you can stay with us a little bit more to listen to the other speaker and answer to Q&A. Boris, it's now time for you to give us. You are a little bit in the dark, but no problem, we can hear you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me first try to share my screen. So now I'm there. Yes, I hope you can now see the title page, which says Europe and the global data economy.
Yeah. Now we see it.
Okay, very good, excellent. So yes, I would like to also take the opportunity to touch upon a couple of points that Ivo was already mentioning. In particular, I thought it might be a good idea to share a little bit in this audience the article that was mentioned, which Hubert, you and myself, we wrote before the summer break, and that was published in the Grand Continent in both French and in German, because I think it summarized nicely a couple of points that, of course, not the two of us came up with, but let's say summarize a little bit the reflection of the state of the play and also the adoption of data spaces in Europe, but also beyond. And if we start off, let's say, with a little bit, let's say, looking where we came from and where we stand, it's what Ivo has said, and I can once more would like to use the opportunity to point out that the European strategy for data is a concise and to the point document, which of course embraces the fact that data is critical to innovation. So, and that is something that I also would like to stress. It's not just a means to, let's say, to fulfill reporting needs, but it is mainly a resource of innovation. And once more, the good news is in Europe that we sit on the often cited treasure of data, which also comprises data of high quality, of data that is not publicly accessible. Also, Ivo mentioned that let's say the big, let's say, oil reserves, so to say, have been already exploited, and then we sit, let's say, on those that have the potential to really also increase effectiveness of AI algorithms and model development training, for example. However, we all know that, let's say, that in the current, or let's say in the situation that we were in like 5 years ago, there was definitely a lack of trust when it comes to should this data be shared. Next to trust is probably also, let's say, the lack of ability to participate in data sharing activities that should also not be left unmentioned. So I think that is something that we also together need to focus on to increase the, let's call it, the data readiness of, let's say, the European economy and the European businesses to engage in trustworthy and trustful data sharing. So, but who could explain that better than Ivo? So we put this European data strategy into place, which basically also sets a level playing field and creates a regulatory framework, which I think is also needed in order to make sure that we have, let's say, our rules of the game not only described, but put into place. And also, of course, it envisages the establishment of data spaces in order to spur data-driven innovation. I'd like to not spend too many words on this because that is something that you can, of course, explain way better than I could do. But I'd like to also point out to the middle block, because Ivo mentioned also the European Data Spaces Support Center. For me, it's really playing a crucial role because it is not the case that with the common European data spaces we create, let's say, I think single or individual large projects, perhaps which sit in a room in Brussels, Brussels, which then implement the one mobility data space or the one healthcare data space. No, what we do is we follow, let's say, a European approach where we have in certain domains like mobility and healthcare, many, several, probably more than we can count, individual initiatives, which then eventually form together the European health and mobility data space. And that, I say that because that is also why it's so important that all the individual initiatives do not reinvent the wheel, that they can rely on common standards in order to be sure that interoperability not only in their data space is ensured, but also across data space or then across the data space of this entire domain. And that needs guidance and also, let's say, help and support. And this is what the Data Space Support Center is all about. It's also not the case that we sit in our ivory tower and think of, okay, what should a good data space look like? But we are in closest engagement with the data space initiatives in order to also learn from them and basically, of course, solicit their requirements. And this is what we then transform in, for example, so-called building blocks that can be used in order to speed up the establishment of individual data space endeavors and also to be ensured that interoperability and sharing within and across data is ensured. Right. So next to, let's say, the things that were installed and established by the European Union, we have other initiatives and activities which are also present today, which share the same goal. And I always like to stress that this is also not something that is, that is a given. I must really say that in the entire journey so far, I'm convinced that, let's say, that the great majority of, let's say, the people in this community really share the same goal. That is ultimately what counts, because if we don't have that, then of course things would go astray. But this is really already a big achievement that we have a common understanding and also, a common ambition to implement the European data strategy. Was also mentioned, of course, Gaia-X and the International Data Spaces Association bring in, let's say, their communities that have also been established a bit prior to the publication of the European data strategies. So that is also something which basically allows us to scale faster and also to support these activities. We have, of course, the several projects that are funded, for example, under the Digital Europe program, but we also have, let's say, sector-specific things which do not receive funding from the European Union, but of course, on the one hand side, are extremely interested in teaming up and also leveraging the ideas that, for example, in the Data Space Support Center articulated as building blocks. And on the other hand, because some of them are a bit, let's say, ahead, because they started earlier, we can also learn from them, and that is very good that we have this close relationship. So now, that is also something that Ivo mentioned. After we the European data strategy has put into place, well, things move on. Geopolitical tensions have not been relaxing since then. So what we need to do is basically that we need to make sure that we reduce our dependencies to single sources of certain goods, but also, let's say, services. That is basically why we also need to look into the data space domain, and I will come to that later on an international level, because if we reduce dependencies, that of course does not necessarily mean that we end up with less relationships, but the opposite is true, because we will basically put our eggs in several baskets, of course, to cite this proverb. That means that we have more relationships to maintain. And that also is a call for making sure that interoperability is really not just requested, but is also implemented, because otherwise we will drown in complexity and cost. So what could be, let's say, based on this assessment of where we stand, directions for the future? And I also would like to refer to the report by Enrico Letta that also Ivo was mentioning earlier on, which was published like I think half a year ago or so. And, among the different things that he outlined and laid out for us, he also referred to as the need to understand intangibles like research innovation, but in particular data is, let's say, an object of what he calls the fifth freedom. So we should also make sure that similar like we as individuals have, let's say, the freedom to basically, to go and reside also across the entire European Union, and that should also hold true for data. And I like that very much because it's also something that is in line with activities that are happening elsewhere around the globe. I think in China, to say that data was also recognized as the fifth element, as they call it, so the fifth production factor. They also established a certain national data bureau, and I can say that my impression is they basically also look very, very closely to what we are doing here. So we are not alone, and I think that is something that we need to stress. That data does not reside in their silos, but actually can be used, but in a trusted way. So free flow of data with trust is something which is really at the core of what we should do. Yeah. So what could that mean for, let's say, future directions of the European data strategy? As we all know, it's great to have a strategy, but it's usually, as the environment is dynamic, you always have to look at it in order to further develop it. Was also mentioned global interaction, and I should say that we now have the true opportunity to export our standards across the world. So we are not in a position where we have to react on something which is out there and have nothing in our hands on our own. So this is really a really strong and good position, I would say. We should also make the link closer, which is, of course, natural between data spaces and reusing of data and foundation models. I'm convinced that, let's say, the training and in particular fine-tuning of foundation models with high-quality data makes, let's say, also the AI value chain more effective and more efficient. So that's something that we should leverage. We should engage more in not only bilateral, but really multilateral data sharing, which then would also require endpoints and data spaces to further develop in trusted execution environments, I believe. And that is something which we, for example, see already also happening in the healthcare, the European health data space. Open source and standards was already mentioned. I can also say that we have also made very significant steps, in particular when it comes to standards. Of course, the Commission has now published a call for standards, the request for standard for the Data Act, which is, let's say, happening in close alignment with the activities that we have started at Senelec under the umbrella of the Trusted Data Transaction Workshop. But we have also reached out to ISO, and I can also say that with the data space characteristics, which is important to set the scene. We have already, let's say, passed 2 of 5 necessary steps to come to an ISO standard, and I think that is also a success that was generated by all of us, our community. Because let's face it, in the end, it's of course important on an international basis to set the standard, because who sets the standards also basically controls a little bit how the economy happens. But on the other hand, it's also for adoption important, because there are many, let's say, in particular smaller companies who say, well, Boris, I hear you and I can understand what you say, but please show me the ISO standard, for example. And then I would also do my investments here, because then I can rely that this will be also around like in 10, 20 years. Yes, we also need to, in my point of view, embrace more the platform economics, because, of course, data spaces are decentral and distributed architectures, but in the end, from an economic standpoint, we they behave like platforms, and that is something that we need to embrace. And I also would like to thank Eric and his team for the excellent work on investigating into economic models, which help us to explain under which conditions intermediaries play a role and at which cost that comes, because that is now desperately needed. While technology is maturing, we need to know a better understanding about, let's say, well, the economics of data space adoption, but then, of course, also sustainable operations. It was also mentioned that we, of course, have regulation, which is good because it sets the rules of the game, but we also need to make sure that the way to be compliant is as easy as possible. And Jakob, I'm sure, has elaborated fundamentally about that we need to also create innovation and develop technology which allows us to achieve something like automated compliance. And that is something that we then can also, of course, very well integrate into the data space architecture, so that basically if you use certain data space standards that you comply to data regulation by default, if you may more or less. So that is, of course, a bit longer way to that we have in front of us, but I think we have made good progress. And everything also around verifiable credentials, for example, is of course a puzzle piece, but it's a first step towards, let's say, this ambition. So talking about strategies, I always would like to refer to, let's say, this very common saying from, let's say, the business life. I'm sure that many of you know this: culture eats strategy for breakfast. And we have a good strategy in Europe, but we also need to make sure that it's not eaten up by a non-data sharing culture. So instead, in contrast, we need to make sure that we are fostering a culture of data sharing, and that also goes a little bit back and towards the report that was published by Enrico Letta, because we really need a mindset shift, I'd say, and also, let's say, more willingness to engage in data sharing. That is something that is also not a very easy task to accomplish, because it has much to do with data readiness, with, let's say, embracing the value of data and not just going back to tangibles, which we now see in many member state economies. If we really take this serious to play a role in the data economy in Europe, we also need to, well, change, let's say, the cultural perspectives through which we look on the value of data and also the value of data. So if we then, and that is basically also something which I would like to conclude, if we take that, for example, as an hypothesis, that we basically extend our idea of common European values, which I started off a little bit, towards really, well, embedding this in our culture when it comes to data management and data sharing. Hubert and I, we came along like 6 principles. You may find another one, or some could be, let's say, also consolidated, but I think in general, this is something which we also see in many data space initiatives. So we really need to embrace the ecosystem idea. There is this notion of, let's say, it's called ecosystem and not ecosystem, right? So if everybody just wants to optimize themselves, then it's basically not working. So it really relies on the fact that, you know, the sharing of the data creates overspill value for all sharing participants. Data sovereignty as trust is key, has been key to the developments, but it's really something that should be put into the center even more. I also believe then, in particular, if we look into the SME sector, that we would also should move towards not only sharing data, but also sharing data management tasks, because data readiness in many, in particular small companies, is low. And I think there is a big opportunity if they do not just share their data, but also address the data management task together. I think for descriptive information of, for example, organization data or parts and components data, so basically material data, this should easily be possible. Well, of course, data sharing must be encouraged. And that is something that moves beyond, let's say, just enforcement, but also addresses the voluntary willingness to share data, because it's needed to address the overarching challenges that we have to cope with and that we have to tackle. But also it means that, let's say, individual players understand and acknowledge that, let's say, actually that they are better off if they engage in sharing agreements. And I could also say that this is something which then again requires an economic framework. And once more, what we did with Eric's team is to look into economic models. And I think what we can also apply here is, let's say a couple of, proven concepts from coalition theory or game theory, which go into the directions of, the so-called Shapley value, for example. There are also other means that we can use in order to make sure that we, literally calculate or assess the value, that comes to an ecosystem by the additional member that joins, but also in order to create management or KPI systems for the individual data spaces to control their progress, right? And so how many members do I need to engage for my use case to become economically viable and stable? And these are questions that should guide us more in the future than they have been in the past. Right. Of course, shared data asset is something particular to AI development and innovation. And that goes a little bit also in the direction of shared data management. So we should not, we should move from, in other words, we should find different forms of control. So controlling doesn't mean that I lock up everything, but that I basically share resources according to the governance framework that has been agreed upon by the involved parties. And that again requires a little bit of mindset shift, or in simpler terms, cultural change. Right. I think that, if I'm not mistaken, concludes a little bit my little presentation that basically summarized also as I said, the paper that Hubert and I had the opportunity to write together. By the way, Hubert, I should also say that it was once more a lot of fun to do it together. So that's also important. So that was really a very good atmosphere that we quickly developed once more. So that was nice. And I also would like to thank you to team, that I had the opportunity to team up with you in order to write down these thoughts that we developed.
Thank you, Boris.
So that's basically it, and that concludes a little bit my little presentation. Thank you very much. Good to be part of this community. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like now to hand over right away to Laura, because Laura has a hard constraint at 5. She's speaking from New York, but she has an appointment at 5. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hubert. Can you hear me okay?
Very well.
Yep, I'm just sharing my slides. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
We can, yeah.
Yep, okay. So yeah, thank you very much for the invitation, and yeah, I'm really sorry I can't be there in person, and I won't be able to stay for the Q&A, but yeah, I'm very, very honored to be part of this panel. So today is a big day for us, as you said, Hubert, not only because we are publishing our advocacy and public data sharing infrastructure, as you can see on this slide. So it's a 150-page report and a 15-page summary. But also more broadly because I shared the genesis of this conference, which is that we are at a crucial moment where we need to consolidate everyone's experiences and draw lessons to finally reach a larger and non-specialist audience on these subjects of data sharing infrastructure, as it is absolutely essential to addressing the challenges of the century. So with two think tanks, Digital New Deal Foundation and Terra Nova, that published this report, and dozen people who contributed to it, and some of whom are here today, I think, like Agda and Eona-X, and I thank them very warmly. We've tried to do our part within a limited scope on data sharing infrastructure, which is only the public interest data sharing infrastructures, meaning those indispensable for implementing public policies. So for some areas, there is no ambiguity, like in healthcare, for example, while in other, there is a mix of public and private use cases for one infrastructure, such as in mobility, for example. So to be able to reach a larger audience than us, the experts of the topic, we were convinced that we needed to work in a way that was collective, so connected all the existing initiatives, as you said, whether public, private, academic, or civil society based, across France, Europe, but as well the world, I mean, and all the work that the UN did on it as well. Practical, because we feel that much of the work we do on this subject is sometimes too conceptual or technical. I mean, even for we, the expert, or at least for I don't always fully understand it. And for example, when you are in a situation where you actually have to create and manage such an infrastructure, sometimes we lack of very practical guides. So this is the second criteria. And the third one is ambitious, because these infrastructures are essential to addressing the challenges of the century, as I said, particularly environmental and social ones. So unfortunately, we don't have time. So like all systemic topics, it's very hard to summarize them in a few minutes, as we can see on this panel for all of us. And I think it's great, and thank you for Zach to have a full day only on this topic, because it's so big. So the idea of my presentation will not be to dump all the report's content on you. Instead, I would like just to try to spark your curiosity to explore it and to read the report, or at least the summary of it. So unfortunately, I'm sorry for that, the report is only in French from now, but the English version will be available soon, so you will be able to read it in English as well. So in the report, with all the people that contributed to it and the two think tanks, we started by defining public data sharing infrastructure, linking the concept with all the other existing concepts. So public platform theory, commons, digital commons, open data, data spaces, data intermediaries, GPI, as the UN said, etc. We really like the term infrastructure, actually, because like water or sewage networks, they are not sexy. They are not tech-driven projects like AI, for example, but they are complex. They are long-term, as you said. We can't build them we can't grow three in 1 year, but they are essential. So this is the definition. Then we illustrated all the report with 7 examples of concrete and real infrastructures in healthcare, agriculture. So you can see Hack Data Hub, Mon Espace Santé, My Health Space, responsible consumption, education, mobility with Gaia-X, and housing. So each of these 7 infrastructure is schematically described by the actors, the stakeholders involved in the data sharing. So you can see the ministry, the operators, the practitioners, the hospitals, the citizens, patients, etc. This is example in healthcare with Mon Espace Santé and the COVID certificate and CDEP. Then we explain as well the role of these 2 health infrastructures within the all digital framework. So you can see the house again in the specific area of healthcare. Then we describe in a very easy way its macro and micro use cases. So I won't elaborate, but you can see here the spectacular results achieved in Mon Espace Santé in 2 years in terms of data sharing. And on top of it, as you said, Hubert, we already have 14 million French people using it. And so yeah, we are very, very proud of this result. And on the second healthcare infrastructure, everybody knows CDEP and the COVID certificate, which was as well an expected success, both in France and in Europe, actually. So I think this is good examples to have in mind. So we presented these 7 examples. So you can see here the example on 2 infrastructures. And then we dealt with the why. So the why, in the why, we gradually zoomed in the core purpose of the report. First, we asked the question, is digital technology in general really necessary to address the challenges of the century? Second, if so, within digital technologies, why do we focus specifically on public interest data sharing infrastructures? And third, what is the added value of this report in the context of infrastructures? So for example, on the second question, we said opposition to data sharing infrastructures is rarely explicit. I don't know if you share that. More often, in France at least, discussions are scattered and don't happen at the right level when we have to build this infrastructure. And when there is opposition, explicit opposition, more often it's not about the need, but about concern over the execution of the project. So people would say things like, we are using a hammer to kill a fly, or this won't get past the DPO, or we don't have the resources, or private sector will do a better job, etc., etc. This is the opposition we may have. Yet, these infrastructures are essential because there are direct and indirect benefits that are huge. First, for an operational and budgetary efficiency of the public authorities, and for me it should be our first goal, because this is for common good. Second, for the environmental and economic efficiency of businesses. And third, for innovative and sovereign digital development. So I won't elaborate because you all know, you all have this in mind, but in the report, we gave plenty of examples to illustrate these different arguments. So I think it can be useful. So the question isn't, will we get there? Will we build this infrastructure? But rather, how we will get there, as you all said. So next comes the what. This is the most important part maybe of the report. We have developed guidelines that scrutinize 17 questions through the lens of the 7 infrastructures I presented, resulted in analytical frameworks to help infrastructure leaders capitalize on existing lessons. So these guidelines form already version 0, meant to be adapted and extended, hopefully, by all of you, all of us. So in very short, the guidelines first help leaders convincingly establish the why, which means the reason for the infrastructure and the values that should accompany it. For example, in the question 3, we indicate that the repeated failure of previous attempts is often a sign of real need, rather a misguiding idea. Very important. In question 5, we emphasize the importance of significant efforts at the national level to ensure success, as on Mon Espace Santé for French needs, while simultaneously helping and driving efforts as France at the European or higher level, like we tried to do with the European digital health space, for example, to address complementary use cases, as the one Ivo mentioned before, and to foster a unified European market. And these two aspects, the French one and the European one, feed into each other for sure. So this is the why. Then you can see the what, which helps to resolve recurring questions we always have on technical, economic, governance characteristics of the infrastructure. So for example, if this infrastructure is essential for implementing public policies, our conviction is that it must be unique and publicly managed within the relevant use cases. That's why, when I was working as part of the Prime Minister's services, along with agricultural union and startups, we have strived in the recent months to change the governance of AgData Hub, as Sébastien may have mentioned before, because it was very important for agricultural and green public policies in France. Questions, I don't know if this opinion is popular, but I think that questions around economic model and whether the infrastructure should be centralized or decentralized are, of course, important, but often monopolize the debate at the expense of all the other 15 questions that are already important as well. And then you have the O that outlines the 6 criteria for building a winning strategy. So this is far the most important, complex, and frequently overlooked part. And I think this is what Boris mentioned before as well. So the criteria cover both internal transformation within public organizations and how we should co-construct and regulate external stakeholders in what we provocatively called in the report a collaborative dictatorship. So I hope you will try to know more about this term. And then to finish, we have the O of the report. So all the principles from the guidelines before can be summarized in the macro recommendations shown on this slide at the national, European, and international levels. I won't read through them, this is not the idea, but if there is one takeaway, maybe, it's that, as you can see on these slides, showing all the actors involved in the topic at the national, French, and European levels, it's quite chaotic. I mean, it's chaotic, and we absolutely need to adopt a common cross-ministerial vision in France, and for sure with the European and international levels, and most importantly, to implement it with a great culture, as Boris said, and unwavering determination. This is the most important. So we really believe this would be challenging because it's objectively a very complex topic, but we think as well that this is essential because we absolutely need this infrastructure if you want to be able to collectively fix dysfunctional system and move toward a shared future. And we think as well that this is possible. There is a strong will, as evidenced in this great meeting, and as well as the many expressions of support you will be able to read at the beginning of the report, and that you can guess in these slides. So that's all for me. Thank you very much for
Laura, thank you very much. And please run to your appointment at 5. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Have a great talk.
I would like now to hand over to Mario. Mario, thank you to have been patient because you are there, and so you were obliged to listen to my request to make a switch between the two speakers. Mario, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hubert. Let me start by thanking the organizers for the invitation. That honors me very much. I would like to reflect together with you, more than anything else, on public policies related to this topic of this conference, data sharing, at national and European level, basically based on my experience as a policy designer at European level, and the policy implementer, if I say, through strategies at national level as Secretary of State in Portugal. My presentation identifies 3 important perspectives, and I think 3 simple messages to be retained. We need to be clear about the vision, integrating it in a broader context, and exploiting concrete differentiating assets you may have or you may build. We need to identify an overriding set of guiding principles that inform the modus operandi and stick to them, involving a multi-stakeholder and multidisciplinary approach, and focus on implementation strategies that do not remain only on investment on technologies and mobilization of elites, neglecting the broader acceptance and ownership by entrepreneurial leaders, public services, workforce, and citizens in the context of a proper governance. Furthermore, I would like to argue that the data strategy needs to be closely articulated with other strategies, namely AI and cybersecurity. Before I start, let me do 2 short a prioris. First, the deployment of a data economy is a multi-stakeholder effort, and not just of the traditional actors. Let's recall actually the discussion that we had here before about the provision of automated data sharing services and the session on orchestrators. It actually requires the articulation also of local, national, and European perspectives. Second, today, digital regulation, legal context, investment in novel technology developments, new business models, intertwining of experimentation, research and innovation, involvement of public and private organization, engagement of citizens, you name it, all become much more interdisciplinary and cause at the same time for a parallel sociological, philosophical and ethical debate as we are addressing a common good, the data infrastructures on which we will base the development of our society of the future. But let me then be consequent and start by depicting my vision for a data economy for Europe that is also applicable to a country. In brief, I believe that we need to ensure that Europe becomes a reference in value creation and innovation through the safe and responsible management and use of data, fostering ecosystems of trust and transparency that benefit the society as a whole. This vision highlights a few things. First, the ambition of Europe to position itself as a leader on data-enabled value creation and innovation. Through what? Through new business models. We already spoke about, for example, data marketplaces, and emerging new actors, facilitators, orchestrators, and automatized, efficient, and optimized data sharing processes, all of them respective of the safe, ethical, and responsible approaches. Trust and transparency. They play a fundamental role in establishing a collaborative relationship between institutions, organizations, and citizens. Trust, as it inspires participation and relevant, high-quality information sharing. Transparency, as it ensures that partners and users understand how their information is used, for what purpose, and with what reward. Clearly, from a public policy point of view, the focus has to be on promoting economic development and the well-being of the society at large, taking advantage of a data economy, extending, therefore, the benefit that large corporations already exploit by the identification of concrete business cases to a different and broader set of economic actors, some not yet existing, and public services to support precisely the common good. The implementation of such a vision requires, however, the adoption, as I said, of an overriding set of guiding principles. In my view, these principles are aligned, they are actually informing and already embedded in the EU digital legislation. But let's make no mistake. These principles are not globally adopted, so Europe needs to move fast in demonstrating our ability to compete globally and through the industrial leadership stemming from concrete business cases, or maybe through the Brussels effect or the size of our European Union market. Through those multiple channels convey more like-minded countries and regions or regional or global communities and organizations, namely the integrators, to understand the sustainability and the benefits of the European approach. In the EU, therefore, several acts are emerging as main cornerstones that embed these principles. They have been referred here and there, but let me very briefly summarize. The Data Governance Act, with the focus on enhancing data sharing across the EU, focusing on increasing trust in data sharing, namely fostering the emergence of neutral data intermediation service providers. Also facilitating the reuse of public sector data, and finally encouraging data altruism very much for scientific research, for public interest purposes, or for any other beneficial outcomes. The Data Act, aiming to ensure a fair, competitive, and innovative digital market by setting the rules for access to and use of data, including high-value public-supported data and non-personal data. It actually encourages the sharing of data amongst businesses, between businesses and government, and with the public sector. It sets out conditions under which data holders must make data available to others, very importantly aiming to prevent data monopolies and therefore facilitating SMEs and startup innovation through data analytics. It also promotes interoperability, not just the technical one, but the semantic, the organizational, and the legal. Two other aspects are important. One, the use of smart contracts in the sharing and trading of data. And the second, the deployment of common European data spaces in multiple strategic actors already identified today. These spaces are intended to facilitate the secure and automated sharing and pooling of curated data and its semantics across borders, but also across sectors. Well, in the same vein, the Artificial Intelligence Act will contribute to ensure that AI systems, algorithms, and models distributed or used in the European Union are operated ethically, safely, and again, with the respect for fundamental rights. It therefore includes a range of protective measures adopting a risk-based approach with categories from unacceptable to minimal, each one associated to specific compliance obligations and timelines. The AI Act relates strongly to data in a dual mode. Algorithms and training use the data, but using it already equally enrich the data that is made available in the data spaces. There are two other aspects and acts that are important in this context, the Digital Markets and the Digital Service Act. The Digital Markets Act adopts, I would say, an antitrust logic to assure fair and contestable markets and targets large gatekeepers of core platforms, and you know it, search engines, social network services, while the Digital Service Act establishes accountability standards regarding illegal and harmful content and impose what I would characterize as asymmetrical due diligence obligation on the relevant organizations based actually on their size, their role, and the impact on the online ecosystem. Both are intrinsically related to data and information. But having set a vision and these principles, how can we translate this vision into a real implementation? Well, having started to share with you the vision and the building principles, I think that it's important to identify for you some of what I consider the answers to the challenges that implementation raises, using a simple model, a kind of a simple conceptual framework. More than just refer to the regulatory and legal perspectives that have been already discussed, more than speaking about the investments in the digital infrastructure that are necessary, I'd like to draw your attention to three important aspects, sort of perspectives to which concrete actions need to be associated. Three key words: value, capacity, and governance. A first perspective looks to the data and its value for our society. Let us not take for granted that our societies do understand the value of data and the value that can be extracted from properly managing and sharing data. Big platforms, the ones that are targeted by the DMA and the DSA, obviously, they do understand. Big corporations and large industrial clusters as well. So this perspective, from a policy point of view, should emphasize the potential of data as an asset to drive innovation, to enable new business models, to promote informed decision-making processes, and ensure sustainable economic development. The focus is on the challenges of creating an environment that ensures the maximization of value for the economy, and in Europe, you know that is very much based on small enterprises, for the public administrations, and for the society as a whole. It has certainly to unfold on a number of concrete actions, for example, fostering large experiments of sharing, accessing and reusing data in a sector, or even better, I would say, across sectors. Rewarding the effort to automate data sharing, facilitating the emergence of neutral intermediaries, or making the public administrations more innovative and efficient. It is important to invest on open data policies and catalogs, while at the same time to foster the creation of secure data processing environments for sensitive data. Think about health, for example. Investing on technologies and research institutes able to concretely demonstrate the value of data for policy decision influences both the beneficiaries and the decision makers. Startups may also play an important role in extracting sense out of data, as they normally devise non-exploited in-between relations. Obviously, you see that data spaces find here full applicability, and they should be built as engines to accelerate the adoption and the recognition of the value of data. Well, in Portugal, we have good experience with collabs, bringing together academia and several actors, public and private, that share and benefit from data spaces. It is also actively supporting Gaia-X in the development of specific data spaces. Well, dear friends, in this multi-stakeholder heterogeneous environment, the development of cross-cutting and transparent data governance models is paramount. Let me take the second perspective. I called it capacity building. It actually links very much to Otto say culture. If it is true that the broader investment in the knowledge-based economy and society is fundamental for increasing productivity and economic development, the investment on data experts, on a workforce open to embrace the challenge of the data-powered business, and on citizens with a general awareness and consciousness of the importance of data becomes fundamental. Countries and Europe have to be able to attract the best national and international talent in the field of data to promote advanced research and get champions. But this is not enough, especially if we want to touch the broader set of relevant areas, some of which, for example, have a clear local dimension. Think about the ecological and intelligence aspect of cities and territories. Our societies have to be better informed and equipped with concrete tools, both legislative and practical, to understand, critically evaluate, and use data in a conscious and safe manner, promoting an environment conducive to active participation, for example, in the democratic processes in the digital age. Broad collaborations as the ones presenting here today, and academia and think tanks may play an important mobilization factor. Last, a third perspective, governance. It focuses on the importance of trusted and transparent mechanisms and entities based on the definition of clear policies, standards, regulations, and guidelines for ethical and efficient management of data, and also, as you would say, the associated metadata. This promotes its reliability, integrity, and security throughout the full life cycle. Governance is important for the current ecosystems. Some of them may be replicating more current business relations and existing supply chains that exploit available data in a kind of digital twin mode for optimization of costs and increased efficiency. But also, and more prominently, for the emerging data spaces that focus on radically new business models. that target innovation in the frontier of business spaces and involve not just B2B, but also B2C and B2G. Governance cannot also remain in the remit of a sector or of a set of companies or organizations. Trusted entities will emerge and promote the benefits of data sharing. And also governance has to be very agile, to quickly adapt to increasing technological challenges and to foster effective collaboration between stakeholders, encouraging the exchange of data and resources in a mutually beneficial manner to drive innovation and the creation of value. The governance should be designed to support the development of a collaborative and dynamic ecosystem that fosters also data altruism and the creation of value synergies amongst the various stakeholders. And a last comment on the importance of giving good examples of compliance systems. The labeling of compliance services and systems reinforces the trust and at the same time demystify the apparent, well, maybe real, complexity of ensuring compliance with the regulatory framework on the making. Last but not least, the deployment of secure, inclusive data technology infrastructure is essential for boosting the data ecosystems and realizing its social economic impact. These infrastructures play a crucial role in the secure and large-scale storage of data, as well as in its processing, in its analysis, and its visualization in an agile and sustainable manner. These infrastructures also need to ensure interoperability, integrating different data sets in a consistent manner. The data infrastructure must keep up with the technological developments and must be prepared to store a never-increasing broad set of information. And the computing needs will scale up. And again, the EU-level cooperation will be needed. An important and complementary aspect is that data is today at the crossroad of multiple technological research and innovation areas, and is the main raw material for training and developing AI systems, especially the vast amounts of data like the one referred here as high-value data, supported by public funds. Therefore, the success of initiatives in an implementation strategy is to articulate the strategies for data with the strategies for AI, the strategies for cybersecurity, and the strategies for interoperability, namely public services. Let me then conclude by recalling that, 1, successful implementation strategies have to ensure a clear vision, the adherence to agreed principles, and a set of complementary investments and priorities. Apart from the boards foreseen in the Acts, like the European Data Innovation Board, and the European networks and the projects and initiatives, like the ones around data spaces, I would like to compliment Gaia-X, because it plays an important forum and a contributor to make those strategies real. Data is the raw material for AI strategies, and will benefit clearly from the cybersecurity strategies in place. And when data, often simple and unorganized, is processed, organized, structured, and presented in a given context, is exhibiting a logical meaning and maybe being ready for decision-making, it acquires this label of information. And so, the challenge is to make sense of the data economy, knowing that we are building the next stage, the information economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mario. So I would like now to hand over to Anne for a final set of comments seen as by Arcep.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and congratulations for the conference. And apologies, forgive me for refusing to share with you my cold, so you only be able to see my eyes. I will be the only one like that, so easy to remember. Well, as a practitioner of regulation, and namely as a representative of a national regulatory authority, Arcep, in charge of implementing some provisions of the Data Governance Act, but also of the Data Act, I'd like to start very briefly by a reminder of our main missions, although it's not the main objective of the presentation, but above all, on how we approach these missions. And I will also tell you where we stand and what we've done so far and intend to do, considering what is at stake. Obviously, these are really recent competencies and mission for us, so where we stand, you may feel or disappointed a bit, but that's the idea, to present you this. So two new missions have been entrusted recently to Arcep by the Parliament, so in May 2024. One on regarding data intermediation service providers, the other one cloud service providers, and there is a link between them, obviously, and this is one of my answers to your question, what we intend to do and how we can help. I think a coherence in the approaches to these two types of regulation is obviously one way to to help. So the new mission as regard data intermediation service providers is to contribute to create a harmonized framework of trust, to increase the availability and the reuse of data within the Union. So to provide both technical and contractual confidence, and to facilitate the sharing of data between data holders and data users. Arcep now labels and controls providers of these services. So these are the competencies coming from the Data Governance Act. In practice, as soon as we were designated by the French Act, we opened in May this year a platform allowing data intermediation service providers to notify their activity for all Europe and request the attribution of the label data intermediation service providers recognized in the Union. So I won't go into the details of all the requirements, but to obtain the certification, intermediaries must comply to a series, 15 namely, of requirements to ensure their neutrality and avoid conflict of interest. So for instance, they cannot monetize the data. Any data acquired can be used only to improve the data intermediation service. Other example of requirement for entities also offering other services than intermediation, there must be a legal separation between the entity offering the intermediation service and the entity providing any other service. So a legal separation, a separate legal person is required. Other example with which we are very familiar as a regulator of infrastructure, commercial term, including pricing terms for the provision of intermediation services, should not be dependent on whether a potential data holder or data user is using other services. In other words, tied sales are forbidden. Well, these are some requirements. So far, 6 service providers have notified their activity through our platform, and 9 in total in Europe. So this is for the notification part. The next step is certification. As for the certification, one entity has requested the label so far, but obviously the other will soon do it. And we are currently processing the request. So this is an ongoing process. So that's what I can say, but I would like to insist on the fact that we are working on it, on the process of this request in dialogue, as we want to ensure intermediaries that our practice of regulation is pragmatic and responsive. It would be very paradoxical, as one of the objectives of this regulation and the way we want to implement it is to reduce transaction costs, that on the other end, we would, by a non-pragmatic and non-responsive practice of regulation or implementation, increase the bureaucratic costs. This may sound obvious, but I'd like to tell that. At the same time, it's a pragmatic and responsive approach. We want to guarantee confidence in the robustness of the labeling. And particularly, we'll be very attentive to the neutrality of intermediaries. This is something technical and economic regulators usually do, especially in infrastructure sector. So this means notably controlling ex ante, the legal separation, verifying the terms of access conditions. So this is for the ex ante control, but some requirements would only be verifiable in case of non-compliance. For instance, the prohibition of using data for one's own benefits. So in that case, we'll be able to carry out ex post controls, and we'll also be able to receive complaints from users and maybe ceased of sanctioned proceedings. So that's the way it works. For now, part of it in theory, as it's a very recent regulation and implementation. So it's for sure too soon to draw lessons and take stock of our little experience on that matter. But I want, however, to say that we have discovered intermediaries when we launched the platform. In the prefiguration phase, when we started to study the market and discuss with the intermediaries, open our doors to them for dialogue, we were fewer intermediaries contacted us than the one who notified their existence. So I cannot say this is a result, but well, maybe it's a signal that there is an effect, a signaling effect of the launching of this platform. Like I said, so the stake for us is the implementation of this regulation. It's to strengthen everyone's confidence in our approach. That's the first step. But another stake is obviously the articulation of the different regulatory frameworks. About this, again, we are confident and serene as well at the French level, and this is the good place to talk about that. Cooperation between regulators at the national level is something we are familiar with, not only in academic spheres like here, but on our day-to-day practice. So we coordinate our work with other French regulators, both bilaterally, as is planned in particular for the issue of personal data with the CNIL, but also in multilateral forum, and there will be a network of regulators that the law, the French Act transposing the DGA is creating. So we need to cooperate, and we are aware of that, and lucky of us, we know how to do it. At the European level, we also coordinate our work with other regulators, in particular through the European Data Innovation Committee. So it's a group of experts created by the Commission to assist it in the implementation of the various acts. So this means a coordination between the competent authorities. Most of them are telecom regulators, and another part are CNIL, or personal data regulators. But coordination between the authorities to agree on the interpretation of the various texts, assistance of the Commission on implementation, in particular on delegated act and standardization initiatives. The committee, what's important to strengthen in this coherent approach will also have a role to advise on the Commission on its entire data policy, not just on the DGA. That's where I wanted to point at this point at the beginning on the coherence. So the network is already mobilized, and Arcep and CNIL are very active there. The fourth meeting of the committee was today, so that's why some of my colleagues at Arcep are not here today, because they attend to this committee. That was the second stake, the coordination at all levels. At last, to support the objective of this regulation, that is the data economy, the emergence of new services, beyond or in complement to the implementation of the provisions of the DGA, one stake for us, for Arcep, will also be the implementation of the regulation of cloud service providers. That's the second new mission, which is to remove technical and commercial barriers that hinder the change of suppliers in the cloud market. So we were entrusted this mission. On one hand, regulate supplier switching costs. On the other hand, promote the interoperability of services and the portability of data. So this is the mission coming from Data-Act. And again, as for data intermediaries, our approach to this new regulatory mission and towards these new type of regulated entities that are cloud service providers, the same approach for us, that is consultation and dialogue. So we are about to launch a major public consultation in, well, let's say, few weeks, maybe days, in which we will present the result of 1 year of exchanges and the analysis we made from these exchanges with the different stakeholders. We will also, well, in this consultation, present how we perceive and analyze the dynamics of the cloud market, but also our ambitions to participate in the opening of this market. So it's
Anne, could you please conclude, because we are really late.
I'm the last
and
one,
you have no
so,
more voice.
Yeah. It's the conclusion. So to answer your initial question, Hubert, how we intend Arcep to help, it's with a pragmatic and responsive approach, a coherent approach to the different type of market, the different markets related to data that we regulate. So ensure coherence in our intervention. To contribute to the opening of the digital ecosystems in order to increase freedom of choice for companies and other users. That's my conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any question, any comment about this session, which has been pretty long because a lot of content was exposed? Okay, so if we have no question, I would like to conclude this last panel by thanking very warmly Ivo, Boris, Mario, Anne. I know Laura has disappeared, and I guess I go back to you, Eric, for the final conclusion of the conference.
Okay, we will try to be efficient in this concluding session. I think that we raise several important perspectives today. So in the first panel, one of the important perspectives that was clear is the idea that the development of data sharing ecosystem is a collective process of innovation that needs to embark users in the process, so that a process of learning by doing allows to develop use cases that are relevant for the stakeholders, and also we highlighted the fact that there is a cumulative effect where the use case you develop, of course, generate trust and encourage users and stakeholders in general to develop further use case, but more generally, in fact, there is a process of enlargement and of enrichment of the data space thanks to the development of use case. So there is a cumulative process, and it's a cumulative process of innovation. From the second roundtable this morning, the second panel, I think One of the dimensions that was interesting, and I want to highlight it again in a sense, is the fact that when you consider those orchestrators, you have two complementary approaches. The one that is focusing on functions like logistics, the management of logistics chains or others, and those functions can be basically are transversal across industries. So the solutions that are developed might be replicated across industries, across value chains, while some other, and this is a complementary approach, some other orchestrators are focusing on business opportunities, which are by definition very driven by the logic of value chains or the logic of industries. And basically, one of the difficulties is to combine both and both approach. And of course, this explains this proliferation of initiatives in terms of orchestrators, and it should be clarified in the next steps of the development of the data sharing ecosystem, because of course this is not exactly the same logic in terms of business model for the orchestrators, and this is not also exactly the same logic when considering the regulatory issues. I think this is also interesting to from the two panels this afternoon, but I will let Boris, Jakob, sorry, developing some conclusion about those two panels. But the link that was established in many of the panels this afternoon on the between the development of data sharing ecosystem and the development of AI. I think that we already know that in a sense Europe has not lost, but really lags behind in the development of LLM type of AI. But clearly there is an opportunity with the development of those digital data sharing ecosystem of those data space, which is to fine-tune AI and to fine-tune AI systems to develop services that are useful for the businesses that are triggering innovative process in the context of value chains. And this probably should be also some of the perspective we should have, both when considering business development and when considering regulation and public policies. Typically in that perspective, those digital ecosystems that are manipulating, of course, data of high sensitivity, they could be, of course, on the one hand, relied upon to develop specific services for the communities concerned by those value chains or those digital ecosystem. But the other perspective is also to develop, to derive from those digital ecosystem synthetic data that can be used more widely to develop AI systems, to train AI systems. But Jakob, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. I'll just share a few thoughts that come up in my mind when I reflect on the third panel on automated compliance and the compliance implementation challenge. And I'll leave it to Hubert, I think, to give us some thoughts based on the policy session. So I've been really pleased to see that the idea of automated compliance seems to be taking hold. First of all, in practice, in terms of the Gaia-X trust framework and its use, as we've heard from several speakers today. I think that's a real sort of very important step and somewhat of a milestone. I also saw with great pleasure that the topic has stayed with Ivo Volman and Boris Otto. Both of them made clear statements about that now. I still think that a lot remains to be done. And so that's coming back a little bit to the topic I was talking about, how to drive R&D projects in the European space so that we may have a chance of achieving a leadership position when it comes to the creation of compatible with the EU regulation, compatible compliance technologies. And for that I was suggesting, and I still feel very strongly about this, that we need probably a new sort of third category of research project development and funding. I'm saying that because the topic requires a significant amount of investment in what would normally be called basic research. I mean, for example, you take something like the verification problem in this area. It's a very, very hard problem. And it's something that has been driven largely by actually American computer industry for the past 70 years. 70 years. This is very long-ranging work, and they're still supporting it. And I'm not proposing that we try to compete with that whole project in its totality, but I am proposing that we ought to try to compete with some of these kinds of developments when it comes to work that we want to claim to be in our special providence. When we say we want to take a leadership role on regulation, it thereby follows that we need to take a leadership role in the creation and invention of new compliance technologies in order, among other things, to help the economic argument become even more viable than it is. And so I already made that point, but I'm reiterating it now. The last comment is on the AI topic. I also already said that I think, of course, it's something we need to think about also from an economic perspective as one of the major drivers of value creation from data. While saying that, I also realize, of course, that a lot of the projects that we have in Gaia-X and that we have benefited from talking to in the context of our economic study, they don't necessarily, as of today, kind of live off of that driver. And some of them may want to do that later, some of them might not. But I do think it makes sense to try to bring in that perspective and maybe thereby help projects and stakeholders who don't necessarily see that avenue clearly today, to give them maybe some orientation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jakob. Let me give the floor to Joëlle before Hubert.
Very rapidly, let's say I come back to the title of our day, Data Sharing in Europe, the Implementation Challenge. Thinking about what has been said today, right now, the main implementation challenge seems not to be a regulatory challenge, even if we choose the date because of new regulations. Much more, what we have, all of us say today, is that we have strategic, financial, economical, and on some aspects even technical issues. There's some good news. Better understanding of what data sharing is about and what for, and how it can be profitable, but need to be financed probably more than in a short-term perspective. Let's say maybe not for everybody, but some of them. Automated compliance could be other than let's say, a dream for CEOs. Less good news for some others. It's a process, and we have to work for it. If I sum up with some words, in fact, we are not, you are not, alchemists. In fact, data sharing is not a new method to turn lead in gold. We all heard that data was gold, but in fact, we need to, as we say in French, mettre les mains dans le cambouis, get our hands dirty, and need financing with real money. Good news, the innovation process is in progress. That's it.
Bad news are there is not so much public money available at the moment, at least in France. Sorry.
Thank you, Eric. So I was impressed because we have had this call with Ivo last Friday, and he has remembered one statement I made. If you plant trees at autumn and you want to gather the harvest in spring, you have no chance to have it ready, okay? So I guess this is very much, Luca, what you have said by showing your various level of value created for the company, saving first, and then creating real innovation and value. Several things I am retaining for today. One, if I compare what we have said today as compared to last year, a huge maturity increase can be seen in the way, I would say, people coming from various countries, coming from various domains, are now understanding each other. They know that they do not have exactly the same problem, that they understand the problem of the other. The second point is something you said, Luca, which I have never thought about, is that data sharing is probably one of the most attractive innovation which is available now, okay? And the minute we say it's an innovation process, we realize it takes time, we realize it is risky, we realize it does not work anytime, but still you need to have a collaborative effort to make it happen. And I believe this is a very important way. I have made a quick allusion this morning to the report of Mr. Draghi, okay, when I am seeing that he is proposing to spend 800 billion euro per year to create a new broadband circuit, new high-performance computer. I just wonder whether first the putting in place this culture of data sharing within the various business environment is not something which is at hand, which requires a little bit of a change of attitude. But I believe, from what I have heard today, that we are now ready for pushing for that. But I have to tell you, it will be against a very simple thinking, which is linear thinking. If you put more money, you will have more powerful computer, quicker broadband, and so on. Normally, the linear reasoning is much popular with political people than the sophisticated things. Final, and for me, very important, because this is a promise we have done last year, but we have taken all of the promise and we have delivered today, except one, which was we need to be able to teach what has been working together in this audience. And what I would like to make as a proposal, but obviously it depends on Luca, Joëlle, and Eric, I am sensing that now the matter of economy of data sharing is ready to be taught. And I am advocating that we do it now quickly. I was discussing that with Ulrich, the CEO of Gaia-X. I guess there is an easy way, which is to prepare in the Gaia-X Academy a specific section about economics of data sharing. And I guess, Ulrich, you do have plenty of very interested customers for that, the one who have paid their fees to Gaia-X, willing to see more value out of it. And I am pretty sure that this is now something we can put in place between now and next year. So it depends on us, but it's important that Dauphine tell us, yes, we are ready because it is mature, and we put it in place. I have had the privilege to review some of the proposal of the new call for tender done by the French government about data spaces. I was boiling because I thought if they have read the paper of Luca before making their proposal, we would have saved a lot of time, okay? I'm sure you understand what I mean. So, all in all, I am extremely happy of what we have heard today, and I am very convinced that it is now time to promote that within the business environment and within the political circles. I am extremely pleased that IVO have spent that much time to work on what we have proposed with Boris. So I smell we do have a nice opportunity in front of us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hubert. I will reply to your request during the dinner. So maybe by the end of the dinner, I will accept your proposal. But before that, I would like to highlight the fact that we are only, in a sense, the secretaries of the process that are going on. We are learning from the users, we are learning from the developers, and it has to be highlighted that the knowledge, of course, can be, highlighted and extracted from the stakeholders and from the practitioners. And we are very interested in continuing to work with them and with you to continue to work with the developers of system, to continue to work with the Gaia-X community, but also with the industry beyond the Gaia-X community, and of course to continue working, but this is one of the essence of this chair, with those who are in charge of regulating and building public policies. And so this is not the end of the story, and we will be happy to continue to work together. This leads me to thank the main partners having been involved in the organization of this conference. First of all, I would like to thank Hubert, because he's the one who basically puts that group together 24 months ago. Yeah. And we initiated this initiative. Also, it gave me the occasion, and it gave us the occasion to work with Jakob, and we are very happy with this cooperation with Jakob. Of course, Joëlle also should be thanked for her contribution to this process. And Lucas has been working hard. This is an impressive PhD process, I should say. And so thank you all. And also I would like to thank those who are invisible in the organization of this event, especially because they are behind the window over there. So Audrey and Laurine, we have been working very hard for the organization of the conference. There is even somebody who is not present today, Delphine, who contributed indirectly to the conference, and I'd like to thank also Olga, who just joined the chair but coordinate all these teams. So thank you to the organizers.